I could show pictures of him as a kid where he was 2 years old and he was trying to figure out how this hose went into something. He wanted to figure out how the lawnmower worked. He was always thinking like that. My mom gave him a hammer and peg set. I don't know if you've ever had one of those, but you hammer it, then you flip it over and hammer it again. She had to take that thing and hide it so that she could get him to come to the table. So he was driven a lot with how things work.
I think it was 84, 85. He built himself a Cobra kit car. He built the chassis for that as well, and when I started first hanging around, he was assembling that. Had a big black Chevy in it with fuel-injected stacks on it. It was a little modified, street-legal modified is what he called it.
The Cobra was such a handful. It wasn't faster, but it felt like it was faster because it was such a handful to hang on to. And he enjoyed driving it because it was a lot of work.
That thing was meticulous, just like everything he did.
Michael wanted to make a living for his family, so everything was precision because he knew that to do that he had to be at the top of his game. If he did his job in the race car, that would take care of the business at home.
He just brought a picture of modified racing that was truly professional, and at a time when, you know, short track racing for a lot of people was looked at as not professional, was looked at as hokey and backwoods. Mike Stefanik was a gem of a professional in the sport.
One of the best drivers ever to come out of New England.
Mike's a badass. It's that plain and simple.
Going to the races is my earliest memory because that's all we did in our house was go to the races. Bobby started in '61 and he built his cars in our yard. So we were around race cars even before we went to the racetrack. He won his first race in '63, so he had only been racing a couple of years. At that time, I was 5, so I remember him coming home and waking up my parents and saying that he had won the race.
Got to know Bob pretty well because his dad, Stanley, was the usher for the reserve seat section near the announce booth. You went up those stairs, you had to get through Stanley to get a seat.
I started racing at Riverside Park in 1974. With Bob Polvaleri. We raced against Bobby Stefanik, one of the toughest competitors at the park at the time.
You know, we all think about Polvaleri as being the grand champion at Riverside, but there were years when Billy Greco and Bobby Stefanik traded the titles back and forth.
Michael, every Saturday night after the races started and everybody got seated, he'd come zooming up the stairs and he'd sit up on the railing next to his dad and watch the races and watch his brother win.
Yeah, I used to go there and watch my brother Bobby run, and I learned a lot just by standing up there watching him.
It seemed like from the very beginning, Michael was very interested in what Bobby was doing. He started winning more often. He had his first championship in '65. By then, we were going all the time.
One of the steadiest, and he'd pick one car off at a time. He was not over-aggressive, very careful on the track, but very meticulous on the track, too.
He was driving the Skotnicki brothers coupe, the number 20, winning championships, contending and winning Riverside 500s. And like most of the people that raced the park in that era, didn't travel much beyond Riverside Park. But at Riverside Park, he was the local hero.
He was on television and he was in the newspaper. He was so cool and he was like a superstar to us. And in 1970, in January of 1970, he brought Mario Andretti to our house. Mario Andretti, I mean, that's like having Taylor Swift come to a 10-year-old now.
Bob Stefanik won a lot of big races at Riverside, driving for the Skotnicki brothers and later for Mario Fiore.
Bobby was definitely somebody he looked up to as an idol.
The things that he told Michael to do or that were important, Michael really hung on to those. One of them was Bobby won the championship in '73 without winning a race. Michael thought that was awful. If you have a season where you don't win a race, that's horrible. Bobby was very proud of that season because he said it's consistency. You've got to take care of your car. You've got to take care of the equipment.
And that's something he instilled in Michael. You know, he said, hey, it's championships that matter. That's what people remember. People don't remember who won last week or who won what individual race. Bob was taken from us way too soon.
And he always had asthma. I knew that. I remembered it, I guess, because I had asthma as a kid.
I think he fought asthma from a young age, and I think it finally caught up with him.
It wasn't a total shock because you knew he had been sickly with his asthma. It was shocking to the extent that it's somebody in your community that all of a sudden is gone. But it was awfully young to go.
For years, I went to Riverside Park. My father brought me there when I was 8 years old, and that's what introduced me to racing. I loved it from the day I showed up. I just happened to start rooting for Bobby Stefanik, not realizing that a few years later that I was going to be racing with his brother, Mike.
I had a lucky break. Bob Wickup from Hamden, he had like 3 cars that he used to run at Stafford. And I don't know, one of his drivers moved or something, or I don't know, they ended up building another car or something. He had an extra car. And I kind of told him I won a bunch of go-kart races, which I really didn't do. And I talked him into giving me a shot at, just trying it out. And that was a big break for me because normally you have to come up with, a car and a truck and a place to work on it and all that.
I think it was strictly stocks. He started off first with it at Stafford. His crew chief at that time was Richie Kearns.
Well, you saw his picture, and his picture kind of led my belief to that he was probably not that approachable. But he came over to me one night and said, would you come and check the air pressure on my tires? So I went over there and, he started talking with him. He didn't seem like he had seemed at the track.
That's where I met Richie Kearns. He was helping Bob on one of the other cars, and we just seemed to get along real well. We hit it off.
He seemed smart, knew what he was talking about. He'd done a lot of reading about stuff, but he had a lot of education in a lot of things that didn't pertain because he was way ahead of, his thinking was way ahead of what you could possibly do in a sportsman car. He was talking about bump steer and things like this. And I said, well, you're very limited in what you can do because you got to use stock parts. He was 19 years old at the time, and I know I can do this. I've watched my brother race all my life, and I know I can do it. I know in my heart I can do this. I just need a chance.
We decided to go out on our own and build our own car, and that's the first time I owned a race car.
When we started, I was the primary, and he was my helper. As we worked over the years, I made damn sure that he became the primary and I became the helper because that's what I wanted. I wanted him to be hands-on to learn this thing.
I met Mike and Rich Kearns, who were running a Stafford Sportsman, and I figured they'd be a good bunch to hang out with and learn some things and how to build race cars and how to go racing, and that's basically how we met.
We started work at 7 o'clock in the morning. We worked till 5:30. We went home, had dinner, took a nap, and we slept fast. And then we get back at 7 o'clock and worked till midnight. Once Stairway to Heaven came on, bing, time to go home.
Richie's very entertaining, extremely smart with race cars. He taught Mike and I just so much about racing, how to go racing mentally and the workload. Rich wasn't afraid to work, and he made us work. We had some good times with Rich.
There was no wins in 77. The fact is, there was not much luck. We weren't doing very well. But then all of a sudden, about 9 races into the year, we all of a sudden got a top 10 finish. All right, we're getting there. We're starting. Good going, Mike. We're getting there. We're doing something right.
I remember that year, 77.
Yeah.
It was $15 to get in the pits at Stafford. My father said, I'm not going to come here week after week spending $15 a week to have you just drop out. I'll come back when you're finishing. That's a lot of support right there.
So
we weren't used to losing.
We didn't have too great a success in 77. 78, we won our first race. We won our first race at Stafford.
Tommy Rosati was winning all the races. Michael snapped his win streak.
We were all over the moon. I mean, if you look at that picture,
he was like in a different world.
It was an incredible feeling. I know he wanted more of it.
The next day, Saturday, him sitting on the sofa with my wife and I, and we never knew if we'd ever win another one. To have won that one was like I mean, it felt like a big, big deal.
He was really beginning to make a name for himself then.
He had a tricked out GTO.
And I think it was a Pontiac GTO or Tempest, but it had the big front fender flares and stuff.
Oh yeah, he called it the Darth Vader Pontiac. And fans loved it. They thought it was fantastic. You know, they'd come down there, they wanted to see the car and everything. You know, because it had the bubbled fenders and swoop down.
And it was purple, like a vampire.
Yeah, they thought it was a cool looking car.
I first met Mike when he was running the Sportsman division at Stafford. Limited Sportsman, they called it, 6-cylinder cars. Just an ungodly terror in that division. And you knew he was going to be good. They had great stuff. You could tell by looking at it, their stuff was a little racier than some of what they ran against.
In '79, we built a Camaro and kind of interpreted the rules to our advantage and come out with a real fast, light Camaro.
They went from a Pontiac to a Camaro that year. Richie Kearns was very involved in that car. And Michael, the first night, I think I don't know, there was a motor wreck or something. And then the second week he finished second, and then he won 9 in a row. Ed Yarrington would take him up into the tower and say to him, hey, could you just make it look close?
It was like me driving a Ferrari against people with station wagons. I had such an advantage with the car.
They had put a $100 a week bounty on him, and they jacked the bounty up $100 every week, and that to keep up to I think it was up to $500-600 or something like that. So it was well worth it. The FIORE 100 came around. Now, the FIORE 100 was always a big deal. So we were running the Sportsman half of the thing. I guess they upped it to added five more laps or something like that. So he started 18th, and like the third lap in, he got a flat tire. So he came in the pits. I changed the tire, he went back out, and I looked in, I said, well, I guess this is going to come out to be the first race we didn't win. And lo and behold, on the last lap, coming through turns 3 and 4, coming off the 4th turn, he took the lead and won the race. And lo and behold, 45 years later, I'm looking through pictures and I see in Victory Lane, who's that in that picture? Bobby, his brother. Seeing that now does my heart good, because I didn't know that he'd ever gone to watch him race until he got into the modifieds.
It was a difficult transition. Bobby was having some heart problems, and it was just too hard for him to be at the track. It wasn't that he didn't have an interest in Michael, he just couldn't do it. It was too hard.
I mean, he lit Stafford on fire. Stafford was never an easy place.
He was definitely a standout then, and because of the Stefanik name, made you pay attention to him.
He won the championship at Stafford, but while this was going on, he was also back at Riverside. Michael was approached by, I believe his name was Ed Conley of the Hosmer Conley number 28. And he said, saw you running out here with your sportsman car, you're doing pretty good, and our driver didn't show up tonight. Would you like to try it? Well, I'd always told Mike, make sure anytime we go to a racetrack, you've got your helmet and your shoes and your fire suit in the car with us. So here's Mike suited up and hopped into the 28 modified and went out and ran that. For a rookie, first time in a modified, he finished 8th. And he ran that car several times throughout the rest of the year. So that car would actually be his first modified ride.
I was always shooting towards the modifieds. That was like the premier division in this area.
Stafford was always the primary place to be, because when the Aroots took over, if you want to make a name for yourself, that was the place.
That was the best step to step into a modified.
Yeah, it was the best
to
step.
win the late model sportsman division and move up. It happened often. So that was kind of the plan.
We got down to the end of that year, which he won the championship. And I said, I have done everything that I know how to do. It's time for me to step aside. My mission is accomplished. I wanted to move away because when I started out there, I took the lead role, but I gradually gave it to him.
Richie knew he was going to be getting out to take his son racing. And so Sly stayed with Michael after that. And they worked very well together.
Rich was a boss. He was a boss at U.S. Insulation. That's where Rich and Mike worked. I went in there thinking it was all about having fun going racing. And Rich kind of showed me that it wasn't just fun. It was a lot of work. He was a pretty strict guy. A lot of fun, but really strict. I learned a lot from him. Racing wasn't a game to Rich. It was a really serious thing, how to build race cars, how to prepare race cars, how to mentally, go racing. There's a lot of aspects of racing that Rich taught us.
He got rides in street stocks and in late models, started winning in late models, and eventually, we all know the story, got a chance to drive a modified.
I got a ride with Eddie Connolly at Riverside Park and ran a limited basis, and then we got together with Mert Bell from West Springfield, and we got the Troyer car.
He ran a 64 for this guy, Mert Bell.
1980, I think it was, he won his first modified race at Riverside, and he beat Richie and Jerry Cook. It was a 100-lap show.
Getting into modifieds is a fast division compared to anytime you step up from any second division to a modified, be it a pro stock or a SK car. The speed in a modified is quite incredible, and I made a lot of mistakes. It wasn't the speed so much I was afraid of. It's just I took some stupid chances and wrecked some cars and had a bad attitude about different things, and I don't think like that anymore.
So at the end of 1980, Michael's modified career wasn't going very well. The car he was racing in, he had won one race, but it was running out of money. And Richie Evans knew that Michael had something. He always saw that in him.
Richie and Mike hit it off real well. Richie really took a liking to Mike, kind of like took him under his wing. So it was pretty neat for me. That's how I got to meet Richie and Billy Nazowitz and all those guys. I was starstruck by him really at the time, and it was a great opportunity.
Obviously, Mike's big break was the 1980 World Series at Thompson when he drove Richie Evans' backup car.
Richie always seemed to kind of take him under his wing, always talk to him.
I remember him talking a lot about Richie Evans, how he felt like he was mentored by him.
He thought the world of him. That's where he learned most of his skills as far as chassis building.
Richie and his guys had put together a really strange car. It was a straight axle, very much offset.
Which was something a little bit different. Nobody ran a straight axle car back then.
Eddie Flemke drove it at Stafford, first time it ever been on the racetrack.
Called my father and asked him to test it at Stafford, and so you get the bugs worked out, because he said no better person could do it than you, whatever. So my father gladly did it.
He warmed it up for the fall final with no intention of racing it, but then he wanted to run it and put Mike in it for the World Series at Thompson, which was a week or two later. And I remember I talked to Richie, and I knew he was going to do it.
And he called the house one day. And I answered the phone in the kitchen, and he goes, "Hey, this is Richie. Is Michael there?" Richie! I knew it was Richie Evans. I knew his voice. I'm like, oh my God. So I put the phone to my chest, and I'm like, "Mom, it's Richie Evans." So she goes, "I'll get Michael." She runs out in the garage, and Michael comes in, and he goes, "What, are you kidding me?" I'm like, "No, it's him. So he goes, "Yeah." So he asked him if he wanted to run his backup car at the World Series. Michael's like, "Yeah, okay. Do I need to do anything to get seated for the car?" "No, just bring your helmet and come." Okay. Michael's like, it's off the phone. It's like, oh my God. We were just, it was the most amazing thing.
I remember Richie saying that the thing that impressed him about Mike wasn't necessarily his raw speed at Riverside, but the fact that he was steady. I remember him saying, you can race with this kid. What really impressed Richie was the fact that he had a good head on his shoulders.
Richie Evans told him once, if you want to be really successful at this, you have to build your own cars, because you have to understand how every piece works. And I can build a championship car and I can sell it, because by the time I've sold it, I've already got an idea of what I can build that's going to beat that car. And Michael just took everything Richie Evans said to heart. Richie Evans was sitting on the end of his trailer one time. Michael told this story 1,000 times. I went over to talk to him. I wanted to just pick his brain about something. And he's just staring off into the distance. And I'm talking away. And finally I said, "What is it that you're looking at?" And he said, "I'm looking at who's buying tires, because then I'll know which lane is going to go on the starts and the restarts." And Michael said, "He's racing before the race even starts."
I don't know, I was really honored that he would, consider me to try out his new car, and I was a just a nervous wreck because of, it is Richie Evans' car.
Everybody says, oh my God, I can't believe Richie Evans is putting Mike Stefanik in his car,
That was like instant credibility, and nobody really drove Richie's car.
I was surprised because Richie wasn't known for giving rides out with his other cars and stuff.
He was so excited that I don't think he slept.
I remember him saying that he couldn't sleep that night. He was up all night doing laundry, and he said he hardly ever did laundry. It was just one of those things that hung around. But he said he just had to keep doing something all night. He was a nervous wreck.
That was such an honor to him to be asked by Richie Evans to drive his backup car.
Standing in the pit line the next day, standing there with his helmet in one hand and he didn't even have a duffel bag. He had his fire suit in the other hand, and people were coming up to him and saying, "Oh, what are you driving?"
I remember Mike saying that the funniest thing for him, or the strangest thing for him, was standing in the pit line, to walk up and get your pit pass. And people would say, "Hey, Mike," because he didn't have a regular Thompson ride or Stafford ride. He was a Riverside guy that year in that 64 Troyer car. But people would say, "Mike, you got a helmet bag here. What are you driving?" And he said to answer the 61, it was like an amazing thing because it almost didn't seem real the first time somebody said, "What are you driving?" "Oh, I'm driving the 61, man." Because in that era, it would have been unbelievable.
So was the Thompson race, and Richie had two cars there.
When he went there, he was under the impression that all he was going to do was shake down the car, because that's basically all Richie asked him. "I got a new car. Can you come up to Thompson and help shake it down?"
In practice, he was actually running some better times than Richie was running with his car.
And the next thing he sees is Billy Nazowitz comes over with black tape, and he puts the X on the doors. And he's like, "Uh-oh, I'm going to race this thing, I guess."
I was at Thompson just as a kid, so it was a big deal to the fans. And I really didn't know who he was at the time.
Mike had a really good day. It was a good opportunity that Richie gave him.
And from what I remember, he actually was doing quite well in the race. I want to say he got up as far as top 5 with the car.
I'm not going to say I was rooting for him, but it was kind of cool because the car was fast and stuff, and we were Richie fans, so rooting for Richie, but he'd probably pop me in the back of the head for saying that.
Mike was running really well with it. I think he was running second or third at the time, and the motor started skipping, and Mike was afraid of blowing the thing up, so he pulled out.
And as soon as he pulls in, Ronnie Bouchard gets a flat. What would have happened that day?
Back in the day, nobody used electric fans, and Richie had an electric fan on that motor because of clearance problems with the straight axle. And that's what the problem was, an electric fan that was starting to go away, and Mike thought the motor was going to blow up, so he pulled out. But if he didn't, he probably would have had a good shot at winning that race. I think it was Ronnie Bouchard, Richie, and Mike all running together. Richie actually said he thought he had a good shot at winning. I don't think he thought he could get by Mike with the car he had that day.
He would have won that race, but it was the talk of the town. Everybody thought that was something.
And it was a big vote of confidence for him to put Mike in that car.
Michael was noticed quite a bit from that race, and I think it surprised a lot of people how much talent Michael actually had in a modified.
It helped me with self-confidence, as well as giving confidence to some other car owners that wouldn't normally give a rookie a chance. They figured, heck, if Richie put him in his car, maybe I'll give him a shot. So it definitely helped. That was Richie's goal, I guess. Is what he said to me. It was going to help me out, getting a ride, as well as my, just getting me going.
Because he had done that, he got Lee Allard's opportunity the following spring, which was a great car because Bodine had just gotten out of it. But he flipped it the first race. He flipped it, and then he had a new car coming up, and we took that one to Oswego, and he destroyed it in the second turn. Richie Evans looked at it. He was like, I don't think that car's safe. Michael was young, 21. He was like he wanted to win, so he wanted it real light, but he compromised on the roll cage, and it just folded up. It was a wonder he didn't get hurt, but that was the end of that. So we lost that ride, and we were left with nothing to do going into 82.
I worked at RGM Racing. They built race cars. Chuck Rubaugh had a shop, and I was there for 3 months. And and I needed to leave, and he was trying to find somebody else. So he talked about this guy, Mike Stefanik. And so when Mike came in, our careers overlapped like a week or two.
When he went to work for RGM Race Cars, I mean, we were all pretty young back then. I didn't even realize how much Mike really knew about race cars. I mean, we were all learning, just like everybody does. You're talking with your friends and trying to figure things out and how race cars work. And Mike was probably ahead of his time.
When I started at RGM, they had just finished up a build for Riverside Park. Riverside contracted RGM to build a car for a new division.
He built the car, the Pro Stock, went down to Riverside one night. He's like, Theresa, you want to go for a ride in a race car on the track? I'm like, heck yeah. So we went down there. There weren't many people there, and took the car out at racing speed. And I'll tell you, there was nothing that was more of a rush than going full speed at Riverside Park. Michael's hands were like going through the wheel, and I was in the outside, like right out to the wall. And what a thrill. I mean, it was the best, most thrilling thing I've ever done, really.
In about a 1 month span, they built the whole car from conception to ready to race. It was a 2-seater, and they hired Bobby Allison to come up and drive the car and take some people out for rides to get people excited for the division.
So when Bobby Allison came to Riverside Park to introduce it to the people, other people could go for rides in it.
He built the original prototype for Riverside Park when he introduced the series, and then we decided that it seemed like a pretty affordable series to run, so we pool our money together and build a car.
He felt he had a real head start on building a car for the following year, but he didn't have a sponsor or anything, so myself, Sly, and Michael each put in $2,000.
All we could put together was like $6,000 to build this car, and it cost us $6,500 to build it. So from day one, we were $500 in the hole. So we decided to build that car, and Mike had some really good ideas, and the rules were kind of open, so we were trying to figure out how to beat the system, beat the rules, build a better race car. So one of the rules was you couldn't run a coilover suspension on it. So we were trying to build the car as light as we could, so Mike had the idea of he bought a coilover and took the coil off the shock, which technically is no longer a coilover.
He wanted to run the small springs in the front of that car. So he put the spring in the bucket where it belonged, and he put the shock in the middle of it. It wasn't a coilover, but it looked like one. So they made him move the shock to the outside.
So we had a 2.5-inch spring instead of the big 5-inch heavy springs, and not over the shock, so it's technically not a coilover.
Well, in the end, he got to run the small spring he wanted. They were just more concerned that it was a coilover, and it really wasn't.
Went to our first race. Of course, $500 in the hole, so what's the first thing that happens? We wreck the car. Now we're about $1,500 in the hole. We're all scratching our head, wondering what's going to happen here, and things just started working out. We just started winning races. We raced the car at Saturday night at Riverside, Sunday at Thompson, and we had, really good luck at Thompson too. We had a dominant car.
It was just winning all the time. It was just so much fun to go to the races and just win.
I think the whole season one time we finished out of the top 3, we finished 4th. It's because we had 2 flats in the race. We were having so much success with it that the track wanted to change some rules, and we were getting upset with how they were handling things, so we decided to form a rules committee of racers that could kind of monitor the rules with Riverside Park and Thompson at the time. So we formed that committee thinking we were helping ourselves, but the committee decided to go against what we had on our race car, so we kind of shot ourselves in the foot. Mike spent the whole week redoing the car, redoing the suspension, redesigning everything, and we came back, we were actually faster.
He'd win like every other week or every week, and you just got to notice it.
At the end of the year, we had made $15,000 in the bank. It paid for our bar bill, which was considerable. It paid for all the tires. We never wrecked after that.
And we started actually making money racing, which doesn't happen very often.
1982, I think I showed everybody that, all right, this is a kid that's got the talent and the mechanical know-how.
Then, at the end of the year, which is unheard of, the three of us sold the car to Wayne Bellafiore, and we ended up netting, each of us got $5,000. So, I mean, invested two, came out ahead. I think we were the only people to this day that ever made money as a car owner in racing.
We were running the pro stock, and I think that's about when the time Mike met Julie and they started dating.
I was involved in racing since, I guess, the day I was born. My dad, Sonny KOSZELA, raced with Ernie Gahan and Bugsy Stevens and Freddie DeSaro, and we had a lumberyard. And my dad, I think in the 70s, started a speed shop, and I kind of took that over, and that's how I got into going to Racerama. We had a booth at Stafford. I would sell parts, and I knew all the racers.
We used to buy a lot of parts from KOSZELA Speed, and Julie would always take my order, and I was amazed how sharp she really was with parts.
Michael and I met at the 1981 Racerama. I believe it was the first one.
KOSZELA Speed used to have a booth up there, and I guess that's where I guess she had already noticed Michael.
I remember noticing him. I believe in 1980 he won his first modified race at Riverside Park. I was there with my dad and Dave Torini, and I remember we sat in the stands, and I'm like, oh, this is a young kid. I ended up cutting a picture of him out of the Speedway scene. I still have it on my bulletin board, and it was from 1980. I'm like, he's kind of cute. Danny Bennett introduced us. I had a booth there, and Michael came by. I wondered, he looked young, so I had to find out how old he was, and he was older than me, so it was okay. And I remember he invited me to go to I believe it was the VIP lounge that night, and like everybody from the show was going there, and they had the mechanical bull, and Richie Evans sponsored the $2, and I went on the bull, and Michael went over and told him not to be rough on me, and so I didn't fall off. He lived in Massachusetts, and I lived in Rhode Island, and I remember he happened to call the speed shop one day, and it was like a dumb question. It's like, do you know what time the races open? Well, it was like, and he goes, this is Michael. I'm like, Michael who?
KOSZELA had a booth at Stafford on Friday nights, and Michael would always be with Julie at Stafford, so it was kind of foreseen that the two of them were going to get together down the road.
We would talk after the races for hours. We had a long distance romance, I guess. He would come down, I would cook him dinner, like on Friday night, and he never cooked. No, I let him cook twice. And it wasn't pretty. He made me stuffed peppers, and he didn't cook the peppers first. And then he made me spaghetti once, and he made it with tomato paste. So, anyway, we dated for, I guess it was like 3 years. And then it was kind of like, okay, is this going to go anywhere? And then for Christmas, I had asked for, I think, an iron. And so he gave me an iron, and then there was a box, and it had, I think, a 2-pound bag of peanut M&Ms, and there was a diamond ring in it. But he never got down on the knee or anything. Michael wasn't a romantic person.
Obviously, Mike and Julie had met and fell in love and been married, and it was one of the great romances, I think, of New England racing, because by that point, Mike was a big name. The KOSZELA family name was huge.
Julie KOSZELA Stefanik was bred into the racing game and has long been associated. Her family name is a part of it.
If we've had a good race, then, I usually tell us we're proud of them, or if something happened, I said, sometimes I get on them if I'll say, you should have passed that guy in turn one. You had the chance on the third lap, and sometimes I'm really critical of them, but, it's like I always do tell him that I'm proud of him, and, I know he did the best that he could.
A lot of racing wives might sit in the grandstands and take no part. There are some that take a little role. I think Julie always had a big role in Mike's life, obviously, but also his career. It's a cliche to say this, but they really were a team.
Jack KOSZELA was kind of like my father's age, because my parents were in their 40s when we were born, so Bobby was 15 years older. So Jack KOSZELA, Julie's grandfather, was kind of like our dad's age, and they just saw eye to eye. Michael would just go over and hang out with him just to hear what he had to say. He liked his philosophy on life.
So why did you pick Mike Stefanik to be your driver? What made him better than the rest?
I picked him on account of Richie Evans. But he came to me, put his arm around me. He said, why don't you give that boy a break?
Richie kind of took him under his wing. He's the one that told my grandfather, he said, this kid's got potential. You should help him out.
When he put that motor in the car for him, that was a game changer for Michael, to have a Hutter motor back in '89. I mean, that was the hot setup, but who can afford that?
And it was neat to see him at racetracks, and he'd be excited. By then he was really getting on in years. He wouldn't show a lot of emotion, but you could tell he was fired up watching the races. And I always thought that was kind of cool because that was one of the royal families of modified racing in southern New England.
The 15 was listed as Jack KOSZELA. Sonny was always at the races. The car was at Sonny's shop.
The speed shop was across the road, so that was kind of Sonny's involvement. If you needed parts, they were right across the street.
It's a whole family affair, and being son-in-law and my father and myself and Julie, it's just great.
That whole team that Mike had at the tail end of the '80s, himself. Sly Szaban was the crew chief, and Sly had been with Mike through the pro stock years. They were tight. Sly was obviously sharp.
One major part of the puzzle to make it all work was Dave Torini.
Dave had been with Bugsy and Freddie DeSero and the KOSZELA family forever.
He was a major guy over there. Michael used to call him resident genius.
I take care of the transmissions, rear ends, basically all the running gear, make sure everything stays in good shape and can't have anything break during a race.
Dave knew everything about a race car. He knew how to build chassis, how to build motors, transmissions, rear ends, understood shocks, understood race car dynamics.
And to have at your disposal a guy who probably forgot more about race cars and just pure mechanics than most people ever know. And I think that rejuvenated Dave as well.
Mike was young. I was young. All the guys were young on the team. And Dave is the one that pulled it all together and pointed us in direction. And he knew how to win races. He knew how to win championships. And that was a huge part of our success.
Now, this truly is a family-run operation because not only is Mike Stefanik the driver, but he's also your son-in-law. So that must make it a little bit difficult to work with, especially if you get upset with him.
No, I never get upset with him. No, he does a real good job.
So Michael was married to Julie. I don't know how many years they'd been married. But Skippy was maybe 14 years younger. He would get off his school bus, would drop him off kind of near the garage.
And Michael was working on the car, and Skip went in, and I'm sure he was a young teenager, and he had a saxophone with him. And Michael asked him, what do you got in that box?
What are you doing with that musical instrument?
Why would you want to play that? That's stupid. And I guess he never did again.
And so Skippy put the saxophone down and came into the garage, and Michael started telling him about the race car. And
I go down there on Thursday afternoons when I got out of school to clean the car or whatever, and he wasn't there normally when I got there because he worked second shift at EB as a welder, and it got to the point where he'd have to take every Friday off so he could race at Stafford, and his boss, I guess at EB, told him, he said, look, you can't keep doing this. You got to, one or the other. And he goes, well, he said, I'm going to be a race car driver. I can't have a full-time job anymore, I guess. And, he said that the boss looked at him and kind of laughed. And he said, yeah, I'll see you back here in a few weeks. And that was his last, per se, full-time job, I guess. He went full-time racing after that.
Michael was the last modified series champion in 1986 at Stafford.
Mike winning that track championship at Stafford in '86 would have been just another, title in the list on the wall that somebody had of Stafford champions, but it took on a lot of significance because it was the last year for NASCAR Modifieds as the headline division. They went to SKs the next year.
'87. Racing at Riverside. He was driving the 37.
He also drove for Clint Hanks, the number 37 at Riverside Park, where they won the championship.
Freddie Felton, Greg Felton, they were part of the crew of that. He had just come off the championship the year before at Stafford.
I don't size one up against the other. I think Stafford was a big honor to get your first, track championship at Stafford for Jack KOSZELA. But I was just as happy to win one for the Hankses.
I remember that year it was a big thing that his brother was so successful there, in prior years, that I remember him saying he just wished his brother could see that and been around for the banquet.
I did it in 2 different cars for 2 different teams. The Hanks is real nice people to race for, and I enjoyed running Riverside because of the tight, competitiveness of Riverside Park.
Riverside Park was probably one of the greatest quarter-mile racetracks in the Northeast. It was very challenging, but I believe that if you could race on a quarter-mile short track, you could race anywhere because you get the load of skills and everything happens so fast.
You would watch him and Reggie there. Oh, my God. There's no racing like that anymore with an asphalt modified. And I promote asphalt modified racing.
There was also another race between those two at Riverside that might be the best race I ever saw.
Those two had an understanding. And so many times, who would have known that back in 1988? How many times those two would have been racing against each other for a spot?
We were both gentlemen racers. We wouldn't take each other out.
There was nothing but mutual respect. Both of them had talent, but they never would put each other out.
I believe it was a 100-lapper on a Saturday night at Riverside.
You don't get to see that art form very often, and we were blessed to be able to watch it.
Some of the best short track drivers in the country. It's from Mike Stefanik to Reggie Ruggiero, at the toughest, most successful quarter mile of them all, the Riverside Park Speedway.
Mike was driving the Clint Hanks 37. Reggie, of course, was in Mario Fiore's 44.
Mighty Mike Stefanik has taken over the lead on lap number 18. He'll lead him to the line.
The way that race played out, there were a couple of cautions early on, and then there was a long green flag right to the end. And Mike and Reggie were the two dominant cars.
Mike and myself, at the end of the race, for the last 10 laps, were dueling it out.
When they head to the line, 10 laps to go for Mike Stefanik. Reggie Ruggiero is second, John Rosati is third, Jerry Marquis is fourth.
Both of them are dead out of tires.
Michael was leading, Reggie come up on him and, threw it down underneath them, and, it was sparks and action.
And here comes Ruggiero again. 5 laps to go. The show of the season is going on now.
Cars were getting sideways. They both knew the limitations. They knew how much they could dish out. They knew how much the other driver could handle.
Mike Stefanik and Reggie Ruggiero. They spark, they contact, but somehow they keep it moving. 4 laps to go. Everybody's up and standing here at Riverside.
Those last 7 or 8 laps, everybody was on their feet.
The most exciting finish ever. 3 to go. It doesn't stop there.
One time I did get a little loose coming out of 2, and we banged touch and just continued racing.
And these two guys, trying as hard as they could to stay off each other, because that was the way they were wired, were basically running into each other every lap.
Contact again. A run for the money rally. Here comes the white flag. One more exciting lap to go. Off the second turn. This is the one that counts the most. Here comes the Reg. They're on their seats in anticipation. Stefanik by a bumper.
There's just certain races that really stand out. And that race in 88, that 100-lapper, was just one of those nights.
It was just two guys giving absolutely everything they could give, and it was a thrill-a-minute deal.
He just had one of the best races I think I've ever seen in my life against Reggie.
It was just the best race, and we knew it right then and there, right in that moment.
The most exciting finish in the history of Riverside Park Speedway. It was just good, aggressive racing, and I'm just glad we come out ahead.
It was a battle. Literally one of the best races I've ever seen in my life.
I could watch that race over and over again.
It was an unbelievable race.
We hung out and partied with Reggie's crew until like 3 in the morning because it didn't matter really who won that race.
I'm 99% sure that Mike won, but I can't say for sure. I remember the battle more than I remember the actual thing.
When I think back to the heyday of the modified racing, man, it was just, I know I was involved with Michael's 15 back then, but when Reggie would come out with that 44 Teddy Bear Pools car, it was just, you knew he was the guy that was going to beat and you were going to see a good show.
Right now, the story is about the 2 cars that are right behind me. These 2 cars made the Winston 300 1 year ago, one of the biggest and most spectacular events ever run for the NASCAR Winston Modified Tour.
Ruggiero had come from the back of the pack. Soft tires and the hot setup with the story as Stefanik would try to maintain the lead. The final circuit of competition. Mike Stefanik was still setting the pace, but Ruggiero would try everything imaginable to get by Stefanik, who would hold on to take down the victory. It was Mike Stefanik to win the Winston 300.
1988, Mike McLaughlin won the championship. And I remember the party afterwards, Michael asked Mike if he could try his ring on. And he goes, I'm going to get me one of these next year. And he did.
Before the first race, I had a premonition that Michael was going to win that championship by just a few points. I called my parents and told them that. And I kept it to myself because I didn't want Michael to be under any kind of pressure. And then we went to the icebreaker.
First race of the year, Mike Stefanik gets in a jingle going down the backstretch, goes flipping over.
There was also one red flag for this huge tangle. Watch everybody in this pack get caught up. Mike Stefanik airborne over the top. Mike Ioannidze off to the hospital with a broken shoulder blade.
That was a scary thing, but I remember Michael saying that, I believe it was Mike Ioannidze that was sideways, and if he hadn't turned, he would have hit him in the door, and he said, I couldn't do that.
I looked up, and I seen Ioannidze go against the wall, and he was like completely sideways to the whole pack, and I knew I couldn't go high, so I took a left, and the car just started spinning, and I got over somebody's, I think, right rear with my right front, and just kind of sent me up over the whole pile, which was all right by me, but when I came down, it didn't stay on its wheels.
I was on the radio, and I'm like, are you okay? And he didn't say anything, and then I see him get out of the car, and it's like, well, why didn't you answer? And he's like, well, because it took the roof off of it, so I didn't have any antenna, and it ripped the wires.
They brought the car in the infield.
We started just basically going to put it back together so we can get it in our trailer. Then we're looking at different parts and pieces as we're changing them, and Mike looks at the car, and he says, he goes, this car isn't that bad. He goes, let me see if he'll start up and run.
I knew that Michael, if he had any chance at all, he was going to bring that car back out.
I think the spindle got bent, and the rest of it was all cosmetic stuff.
He got in it, he fired the thing up, and it was running.
And he said to Sly, I think this car's okay.
We changed a few parts and went on the racetrack and just, logged laps and finished the race.
The determination of the guys and just other crews coming over and helping, he got back out on the track and he picked up some valuable points.
It wasn't a hard flip by any means, which you could see by the fact that they got back into the race. But I remember the roof sort of bowed way over, and it was a tough way to begin a year. But the way that year ended for Mike, you could look back and point at that icebreaker thing as, hey, if they hadn't persevered.
Well, I'd say midway through the season, we had some bad circumstances at a few racetracks, and we dropped back pretty far in the points, and it didn't look too good for the championship. But the whole team stuck together, and we started winning some major races, and I think that's what made a difference. It just pulled the team together, and we all worked hard, and it worked out.
Towards the end of the season, it was a tight point battle.
I think Michael had a 60-point lead, I think.
We had a pretty good lead that year in the points. We went to Martinsville.
I went to Martinsville, and I was confident that he was really going to just win that race.
Thinking if we just had obviously we're going there to win, but if we could just have a decent finish, we'd come out of Martinsville in good shape.
As the field went back to green, it was Jeff Fuller still in command of the event. Reggie Ruggiero was still running on his back bumper when suddenly smoke would erupt from beneath the hood of car number 16. Mike Stefanik, who knew the meaning of finishing this race, now finds himself heading back to the pits.
It was early in the race, we blew a motor. And it just was like a punch in the stomach when it happened.
We left Martinsville, Michael had a 1-point lead.
I remember we got back, we came home. I don't even think Mike went to bed he pulled the motor out of the car the next day, and the motor went off to Ron Hutter out in Ohio. And Ron and the guys just did an excellent job turning that motor around in time for us to get it back for Thompson and go to Thompson and continue to chase that championship.
So we had to go back to Thompson with a 1-point lead. I believe it might have been 2 weeks, 10 days, 2 weeks or something. And he lost like 10 pounds. I don't think he didn't sleep and he didn't eat. He was very nervous.
Actually, Tony Hirschman had a shot at the championship as well.
Mike Stefanik, Tony Hirschman, Reggie Ruggiero, all going into the final race in championship contention. And at that time, neither one of them had won a championship, a modified championship yet.
The Winston Modified Tour for NASCAR's National Championship comes down to its final 75 laps. Reggie Ruggiero trails Mike Stefanik by just 1 point, with Tony Hirschman 40 points back, and after 75 laps at Thompson, Connecticut, one will be national champion.
I have to finish ahead of Mike.
That's all we planned all week, is to finish ahead of Mike. He finishes 8th, I'll finish 7th. He finishes 2nd, I'm going to win the race.
Just hopefully I can get to the front early enough to pressure Reggie and have him use up his tires. That's about all I can really hope for right now.
The best races I've ever seen, be it modified, cup, Formula One, whatever, is when you have two great drivers, masters of their craft, in pretty equal, awesome race cars, and they both refuse to lose. And that was Reggie and Michael on any day, but particularly on that day, because there was so much at stake.
That 1989 World Series at Thompson had so much drama built in because Reggie and Mike were close enough on points that whichever one finished ahead of the other one was going to end up being the NASCAR Tour champion.
Remember, Tony got the pole for the race, started on the pole after the redraw.
There it is. After trading best wishes, the race to decide the championship got underway. Ruggiero got a stroke of bad luck early when he ran over some debris.
Actually, I see this thing flying through the air. It was a rear bumper, and it torpedoed my left front tire. Blew it out.
As Ruggiero comes on pit road on lap number 10.
I was sitting in the car driving, with a flat tire, and you just shake your head and it's like, it's over.
I got on the radio, I said, Reggie's got something wrong with the left front, and I knew he'd be back.
Got back out again. The car was okay, it was just a flat.
Meanwhile, Hirschman, knowing he had to win the race to have any chance at the title, drove his heart out, defending all challengers.
Tony led the whole race, won the race.
Stefanik's luck stayed consistently good. He ran in the top 10 all afternoon and seemed to be in control of the title.
I was able to get up back to like 4th or 5th behind Michael and raced him for like the last 3 or 4 or 5 laps.
But Ruggiero came back strong in the closing laps, challenging Stefanik for 4th place. Past the 15 and the championship would be Reggie.
All he had to do was wiggle Mike a little bit, knock him out of the groove, get him loose coming out of the corner, and take the lead. And just, it's a measure of how much racing has changed that he wouldn't do that.
So I remember them coming up on Mike Iwanitsko, and Mike Iwanitsko just pulling over and letting Michael and Reggie go by because he knew it was for the championship.
I remember Reggie was honest. Reggie was probably going through the corners better than us.
Mike held off the determined Ruggiero for the modified championship.
It was one of the most dramatic racing events I've ever watched.
I'm just ecstatic. I couldn't believe it. I had tears in my eyes. I don't cry over races, but I'll tell you, it's just championships. They won with a lot of luck, and we had the luck tonight. Last week we didn't. We broke a piston and Reggie caught right up. It made a dramatic race for the fans as well as for our crew and myself, and we're just real happy to come out the champs.
The biggest track that we ever raced on was New Hampshire. That was our Daytona 500.
The modifieds seemed to adapt to that racetrack very well. I mean, when they first opened that racetrack, we went up there and tested for NASCAR.
We went up there when Bob Bear first built the track and did a tire test for Goodyear, and I'd come in and I'd be like, man, this place is fast.
I remember going through that tunnel for the first time and looking at that racetrack and going like, oh my God, what are we doing here? So it was a learning curve for all the drivers. We've never been on a racetrack like that before.
It's one of the few places that would take me all of practice to get comfortable, even though I ran there 30 times maybe over the years. But there were other people that just took to that place like a duck to water, like Mike Stefanik and Mike McLaughlin.
You go back to the very first race there, it was him and McLaughlin that discovered the draft.
Mike McLaughlin and Mike Stefanik, who were really good friends. I mean, those two guys, they laughed and cut up together and rode to races together sometimes. They were good pals. They were both a lot alike, mechanically minded car builder / driver people. They were trying to figure out, do we need to run restrictor plates on them? Don't we need to run restrictor plates on them? But until that first practice of that first modified race, nobody knew how powerful the draft was going to be.
Then McLaughlin made it look so easy, diving to the bottom of the racetrack. His crew was cheering him on. It was Mike McLaughlin and Mike Stefanik. Evenly matched, they'd come off the turn. McLaughlin to the outside. His two Hutter motors were running right up front. But it was magic shoes that would find magic in the outside lane.
And it wasn't just that you could follow a guy, but those guys were shooting by each other going into 1, and then getting repassed going into 3, repassed going into 1, just back and forth, back and forth.
Stefanik was making his own draft with car number 15 as the two would duke it out at the front of the field. The checkered flag would soon wave. Down to the wire they'd come. Win number 2 goes to Mike McLaughlin.
And those two guys after the race that talked to him, it was like two little kids at Christmas with a new toy. Like, could you believe we did that?
I remember they come in and they were like a couple of little kids giggling about how much fun they were having out there.
They had fond memories of this new discovery they had made. And really, for modified racing, it probably had been since Trenton in 1976 and Pocono on the big track in 79, since a real draft had been in place anywhere.
Obviously, chasing the championship again in 91. We ended up winning the championship, so it was a successful season.
There was good racing action just about everywhere you looked. Then Stefanik seemed to look like he had more steam, more power, and more handles than anybody else in the field. He just moved alongside of Gianolini, stepped on the throttle, and zip zam zowie, he was in command. But Mike Stefanik was about to take the checker that went with being the champion of the NASCAR Winston Modified Tour. Congratulations to him and his crew on 1991.
And because of the success he's been having, you know, other opportunities were there for him. I think he just saw them. And I mean, working on a race car, everybody thinks it's just fun. You get to do that and it's, you know, for a living. But Mike did that full time for years, and it's a grind. I mean, it's building race cars and racing cars and everything that goes along with it. And I think there was opportunities for him to move on.
When the Busch North came, that was what I had seen on TV and, you know, understood what Winston Cup was. These were the cars that looked just like the Winston Cup cars.
The big deal that sold the North Series was it was NASCAR. And the cars were the same as the NASCAR Busch South Series. And back then, people would talk about Busch North and Busch South.
The cars are identical. Same engine package, same carburetors and everything. You could almost take a Busch North car and go to Daytona with it.
And all of our races were in New England. They were short track races for the most part. Up here, you know, we had Dick McCabe and Stub Fadden and Jamie Obey, who won 3 championships. Those were huge names, and they had a following. So if you went to any Busch North race, every one of those drivers put fans in the stands.
When they showed up at Stafford or Thompson, it was a huge deal to the fans to have those cars there.
That's what made the Busch North special up here, was it had a certain fan following.
It's hard for people in southern New England to even understand how big the Busch North was in the 90s and early 2000s. I think they saw the end of that, or they see now, you know, what it's become with the ARCA East, and it's a shell of what it was at that point.
Michael used to race for Ray Pearson in the Pro Stock back in when he was running for the regional, which was probably 86, 87, somewhere in there. I guess it was 91. That was when the Busch North was really starting to flourish. Ray Pearson got himself a Busch North car.
I had taken the kids with me that night, and I said, "No, Uncle Michael's not going to do great tonight. He's in a whole new division, so it's not like the modifieds." And he ended up doing a bottom shot.
Mike Stefanik's going to go to the outside. Mike in turn number 1.
Stefanik has the distance to make the bottom to the top. He picks the bottom. There goes Mike Stefanik. Mike Stefanik, the current leader of the Winston Modified Tour point standing, showing that he can run a full-body car so very, very well here at Stafford.
And it was like, oh, he can drive these cars too.
Beat Ricky Craven for the win.
The first career Busch Grand National win for Mike Stefanik. The double checkers are up. It is a Cinderella story. The independent team has shown the best that he can get the job done.
Michael was a guy who I think could jump into anything and go well. He understood cars. I'm sure that anytime he jumped into if it was a one-off deal even, I'm sure he would have had some input into the setup that day. And Mario Fiore was in a pretty long stretch where different people drove the car. Interestingly, Bobby Stefanik had driven for Mario in the 70s.
And Bobby adored Mario. Our whole family did.
So Mike knew Mario. Mario was a very social guy anyway. So I'm sure they'd, you know, had either had 100 cups of coffee together at the races over the years, or maybe have a drink on 100 different nights at Josie's Bar across the street from Riverside Park. So, I mean, Mike and Mario would have been way, way friendly by then. It wouldn't have been just some strange car owner.
I just thought it'd be great if those two could ever race. And it worked out in 93 that Michael got to drive for him.
So the big news was Mike Stefanik driving for Mario Fiore. You know, we knew that Mario always had great cars. We knew what Mike Stefanik could do.
Mike had a knack of jumping into things and going fast, and Mario's car was good enough in that period of time that he could put different people in it.
Mario had backing from McDonald's, and it was kind of a big. Mario always had big sponsors on the car.
Well, that car also had McBets on it. Mario's cars, their sponsorship always stood out among sponsors. When he had Teddy Bear Pool, when he had Miller Beer, when he had Gulf Oil. I mean, the car stood out. You knew where the 44 was anytime on the track. So the race at Richmond, I want to say, was end of March, beginning of April, and they had a great field.
That is the field of modifieds, and what a job NASCAR has done. It has them all lined up. All the cars are running. They are on the grid, ready to go. All the motors are running, and right now, Randy is with the pole sitter, Mike Stefanik.
Michael goes out, wins the pole.
Again, I had a premonition. I said, you're going to win this race. It's going to be very exciting, but you're coming from the back. And Michael's like, that's not good, Theresa. I'm starting on the pole. And I was like, I don't know what happens, but you win from the back.
Since qualifying, Stefanik has changed almost everything in his car. He has changed the springs, he has changed the way the rear end is located in the car, he has changed the anti-roll bar, he has changed the stagger. He says, I may not be the fastest guy at the beginning, but I will be the fastest guy at the end. Will they run over him on the green flag, or will he be able to hang on? We're about to find out, because we're about ready to get down to business.
And then is leading the race, and he's got Jeff Fuller right behind him, dogging him.
Everything happens so fast. Here's another attempt at a pass. They're taking advantage of the air. They're actually taking advantage of the air from the car in front of them, being able to lead.
Race goes on, and they had a bad pit stop.
A very, very slow pit stop for Mike Stefanik. It just didn't work.
I can imagine how frustrated Michael was sitting in that car waiting for that car to get the jack to come down.
His crew did a terrible stop. Stefanik went in as the second car. He went out at the dead tail end of the lead lap.
Michael had to start last, and he came up through.
Stefanik running in third. Look at this. 3 wide down the back stretch. Leading your leader. Fuller on the low side. Stefanik up high. More to go. Brand new car in the lead. Leading's one of the best guys at blocking in division. Look at Stefanik on the high side.
I think he really loved Richmond. I think Richmond was his favorite track.
Stefanik, your leader, takes the 2 to go signal right there. Watch this. Into the first turn. Pull it under. First turn. Whoa, little contact there. Little contact. Nice little smoke there. Yep.
A little bit under 5 laps to go. Jeff gets a little bit high in turn 3, and Michael's able to edge it out and pull away to the win.
Well, these guys know they're on television too, and they are going at it. Whoa, strong in the bottom. Boy, he almost lost it there. Yep.
And he won that race like on the last lap, and it was televised, so it was so good for the sport in general to have a real exciting race televised.
I'm going to tell you what, that was more than car, that was more than engine. If you want to know if a race car driver makes a difference, you just saw a terrific demonstration of that. That was a lot of heart and a lot of desire and a lot of drive. That was one exciting race, I'll tell you. I usually I was pretty collected by the end of the race, but I'll tell you, I had no idea who was going to win that race.
I wanted him to stay with that car because I loved working with Mario.
You wonder, could that be the next super team combination?
They won the first race, and just things they ended up breaking apart a little bit in the mid-year there, and actually the end of that year, we took out Michael's own car and put a 14 on it and won the full final at the end of that year. I remember one night we were working at the shop, and we used to work till I think 11 o'clock at night or whatever, and I gave him a ride home that night. And I remember exactly where we were. We were going down Route 102, bringing him home, and he goes, he looks over at me and he goes, well, I got some exciting news. I haven't told anybody yet. And I'm thinking to myself, oh man, he finally got the cup ride that he's been looking for, and he goes, I'm going to be a dad, and I just remember, how excited, just a smile on his face and excited, how excited he was on it.
I never knew if Michael would be a good dad or not. I mean, we never had little kids around growing up. But when he had Nicole, he changed that way. He became a really good dad.
He was a very loving father, husband. He was a good provider. He was compassionate. Spent as much time as he could with the girls. A lot of times when we had our own team, he would work down at the garage, and he would leave, and I remember he would say the girls are standing up in the window and they're waving to him, and he was like tearing his heart apart.
Those two little sweet faces would wave to me from the window, and I hated to leave them, so he really felt a lot for them.
He made a lot of sacrifices. For 3 years. He would drive from Coventry to come stay in Granby, and he'd stay overnight, either 1 or 2 nights at our house. He grew up with my kids. I should say my kids grew up with him.
Nicole was born, and from the time she was a toddler going to the racetrack, she was always there.
Hold your finger up. She won't hold it. She won't do it because you want it.
It was always a very cool feeling to go into the grandstands and be like, yeah, I'm my Stefanik daughter. No, that's my dad.
Michael would always be sure, if he won, to say, geez, I wish the kids were here, they're back home, or I wish Julie was here with the kids.
So I got to thank Jack KOSZELA and say hi to all them guys back in Summit, my wife Julie and my little daughter Nicole.
Nicole was born congenitally deaf, and they figured it out in like 1990.
Growing up, I did have my challenge, and my dad was with me every step of the way. He would take me to my doctor appointment.
And then she got the cochlear implants.
When we turned them on, the first thing he said to me was, so how do I sound? Well, what do I sound like? I go, like that. Like he just had that sense of humor just to be able to diffuse, awkward or, tense moment.
Nicole was a lot like him. She was very competitive. She got a black belt in karate when she was like 13. They had to lower the age limit because she just kicked butt, and she had that competitive edge. Christine was just a little different. She was shy. She didn't like competition.
Every time I saw Mike, he always seemed like he was happy.
Michael really wanted to take care of his family. He loved Julie.
They were just a great couple. Their kids meant a lot to them. Good mom and dad, and great business people. So I can't say enough about them.
Julie loved to have people come to the house and the kids all together. He'd take them out on the boat and put them on a tube and see how far he could fling them off the tube, and stuff like that.
His daughters are, 5 and 7, something like that. Mike's there, I see the beautiful home he has, lives on a lake, trophy room, champion. I mean, it was like, my God. Mike said, hey, you want to go out for a ride in the boat? So put the 2 little girls in the boat. We cruise around the lake, and I'm just going, oh my God, this guy's got everything. He's got everything. We come in, his little girl's got a little fishing pole. She walks down to the wharf. She's pulling them in, putting them in a pail, pulling them in. Finally, I go, boy, you got a lot of fish in this lake. I said, oh yeah. You usually get this many? Oh yeah. Finally, we get done. She's trying to teach me how to fish. We come back with a bucket of fish. Mike says, how many Dave get? He don't know how to fish.
Everything he had to have nice. Not value-wise, but just he wanted it to be the nicest looking, cleanest, taking care of things. He was crazy with making sure his lawn was just mowed just right.
Oh, he was very OCD about his lawn. He had to mow the lawn the exact same way every time he mowed it.
In his garage, every year, he'd have these 1x8 pieces of boards in his garage that on his lawn, he would write down the date, when he fertilized it, what he fertilized it with, how much.
Every day he applied the fertilizer, and he kept that to a routine.
The next line would be when he mowed his lawn, if he bagged it, when he bagged it, and he just had these stacks of boards that I'm like, are you kidding me? But it was just everything he did was like that.
He's got some funny quirks, he really did. When we'd have dinner, everything had to be separated on the plate.
So he would have his meat and then his mashed potatoes and vegetables, and they're always very separated from each other.
And he'd eat them all one at a time. He'd eat all the meat, then he'd eat all the vegetable.
And he would have to start one thing, eat the whole thing, before he can move on to the next thing.
And he wouldn't mix them up. So it wouldn't be, I'll take 1 spoonful of this or 1 spoonful of that. If the peas touched the mashed potatoes, it was bad news. It was really neat and funny, but that's how he lived his life.
The racetrack, he puts on this race face. There's no romance at the racetrack. Absolutely none. I've learned to accept it. I used to let it bother me. I'd go over and say something to him, and he's so into his racing, you just don't bother him. Even the crew, sometimes he's nasty to them. He doesn't mean to be. It's just he's so into his work.
People say you're stuck up or you're this or that. Everyone's there to do a job, whether you're a crew chief or a crew member or a driver or, broadcast. So whatever you're doing there, you're actually working.
I mean, a lot of times people would come up to me and say, like, they didn't think Mike was a very friendly guy, like almost like he was stuck up or something. He wasn't. He was just the opposite. But when Mike was at the racetrack, he was 100% focused on racing. I mean, that's what he was there to do.
How Michael could pick up things was we tire test for Goodyear Tire Company quite a bit. And you go out and you run a controlled test of 3 laps, 5 laps. So in 5 laps, the times would start to pick up again. We'd get slower as we went on. And then the last couple of laps, we'd be just as fast as we were before. So when Mike came in, the Goodyear engineer says, Mike, what are you doing different? He says, well, I work the right front real hard. And when that starts to give up, I changed my approach and I worked the right rear. The engineers couldn't believe that he could pick that up and make the car come back and forth that way. Mike was a thinker out there. He wasn't just a driver. He was a thinker out there. He was very serious. He took the sport very, very serious.
When he put his helmet on, that was his workspace. That was his office. And don't bother me. I'm going to work.
Like, I didn't really bother him at the track because I knew he was
He was tough to approach at the racetrack, but if you got into his close circle, you were in.
I think a lot of his demeanor gets overlooked for how much he processed and thought about everything.
He was a low-key guy. He didn't show up burning with ambition. If you saw him at the race car, he might be walking around with a frown. I always say the great ones, like Eddie Sr. was like that, Richie, Maynard, guys that are mechanically into their cars. They'll frown when they look at, like if they're thinking about what to do with the left front, they'll actually look at it and frown, like a really serious problem.
He had gone to the Eastern States the night before, and he was trying that thing that you play at the carnivals where you take a fishing pole and you hook onto the bottle and you stand it up. Well, he practiced that all day at the shop, and next morning he comes in, he says, check this out. I go out and look in the back of his car, 2 big teddy bears. He says, they shut me off. They wouldn't let me play anymore. He was super competitive.
They were starting to get their feet wet in the Busch North here and there. And in 1993, Auto Palace wanted to go do some Busch North racing. Auto Palace had back in with Valvoline, and it was a kind of a whole collaboration with the Mark Martin Valvoline number 6. Don Ling's cars were the number 6.
Mike Stefanik in the Auto Palace Valvoline Chevy getting underneath Joe Bessie. Bessie with some power down the straightaway. And that's Ken Schrader right behind.
So in 93, he was running for Don Ling out of New Jersey in the Busch North car. And at the time, the Dirt series, the Dirt Modifieds, had a Dirt Asphalt series, which a lot of guys would just bring dirt cars and put asphalt tires on them and race them. But out of New Jersey, Bud Olson Speed Supplies, they had a house car. The thing was beautiful, a 2D. It had an aluminum 410 Hutter motor in it. So they contacted Michael just through, knowing that he won championships in the asphalt mods and his association with Don Ling, who was from New Jersey. And he talked forever about one day building a modified that was kind of different than all the regular stuff that everybody had, and always talked about building his own spindles and what he would do, where he'd put the weight and 4-link and all that kind of stuff. So we hooked up with Olson, who had a chassis business. Their idea was that Olson was going to start manufacturing these cars if they started going good and everything. And they got together and they said, well, why don't we build this car? You tell us what you want for a chassis, and you build the spindles. And he built the spindles in the front end. And, one of their guys came to the shop in Summit, and they built the cage and the chassis, and it had aerodynamic designs like a dirt asphalt car. Basically the right rear tire was covered on it. It was just a cool looking, had a Dodge Avenger roof on it, just looked like their dirt asphalt car. And NASCAR came down and looked at it, and then they said, no, we don't like that. He brought it back, built this body for it. and it sat in the garage. He painted it this color red, the 15 colors from days gone by. And it just sat there, didn't race it, and then he got hooked up with the X6 guys.
Peter Beal and Charlie Bacon owned the X6 car.
We got along great. We were two different people. He was just a quiet guy and a real gentleman, where I'm the opposite. I'm loud, I'm boisterous, I'm a people person.
Originally, I built Peter Beal's cars at Raceworks.
As I was racing in 93 with Richie Gallup, and we were running Riverside Park, and we're having some struggles. And he says, well, I know Barry Kuhnel really good. He goes, I'm going to get a hold of him and see if he'll come down and help us out.
Richie Gallup asked me to give him a hand, and I did. And his car owners, Pete Beal and Charlie Bacon, weren't happy with our outcome, how we were running. So they let Richie go.
He had the modified car. He didn't have a driver. He came to me because I built his race cars and said, who can we get to? I said, Stefanik. He was driving the Busch car at the time, didn't have a modified ride.
They were struggling a little bit with the car that they had, and Michael said, hey, why don't we put an X6 on this thing? We'll go to Stafford and see what it does.
Well, Stafford was his home track in reality. I know he loved the park, but his racing career dating back to that Camaro started at Stafford.
That race, the fall final, we were using his car, which we call Big Red. It's a handmade, one-of-a-kind car that he designed. It had the 4-link rear end in it out of a dirt car, left side panel bar.
That whole year with the Sheba car and the X6, Steven kind of nicknamed it, but Michael got the gist. It was the Steven Steffi show, and that was just another afternoon of that.
And we have Park now in front, looking for 4 victories in a row, would you believe? But this one is far from over.
And we got caught out there on a long run through the middle of the race. Then we finally had a caution. So it is like, gotta get tires.
So Stefanik will be the last of the cars on the lead lap to stop for tires.
Michael outside, passing everybody. He went to the corner and passed 2 cars through the corner, coming back through on those new tires.
And look at Stefanik with 30 lap pressure tires. Blast by both of them as Tomato puts the bumper to Charlie Pasteryak.
They made a late race call, which could have bit him in the butt.
Just about 2 seconds first to second place. Mike Stefanik's late tire change bid to win the fall final looks as if it's coming together.
Michael caught him, flew by him, and we win the race.
Turn 3, Stefanik dives it in hard. And now, just the Sunday paper separates the 2 leaders. Stefanik looks slow. He wants the lead now. He's got it with 10 laps to go.
It was a disappointment, but that's racing.
For the 4th time this season and his 4th fall final win, Mike Stefanik.
That X6 was tough, and the one thing I don't think people really know a lot about Mike, he was so methodical. He would probably run that race time and time again before he ever got into the race.
That following winter, they brought this car to Barry's shop, built a jig off of this. Barry copied this car, so then they didn't run this car after that. They just ran their own X6s. I think they had 3 copies of this. The 09 Busch North car, Alan Avery owned it. So he got hooked up with them. And I think the first race was at Loudon. They went and won with that. So he raced 1 year with them. So 96 came around, and Mike McLaughlin drove for H&H Motorsports, Mike Greci.
Mike and Harry Greci, brothers from East Granby, Connecticut.
We started a company called H&H Motorsports in the late 80s.
Mike was a great guy. He has a great eye for talent, and he knows the sport inside now.
Mike McLaughlin had driven for that team before Mike Stefanik did.
McLaughlin was headed down south.
Here comes horsey Mike Greci, wanting Michael, knowing the talent Michael had, to see if he could master the Busch North car and race it for a championship.
I think that Stefanik probably slid pretty easily into the McLaughlin role because both Mikes were guys who loved to be at the shop, took a really active part in the setup.
Him and Mike McLaughlin, I know for a fact, and I've been doing this long, are the 2 best fabricating drivers I've ever met. And I've met a lot of them.
He knew chassis. He learned chassis on his own.
People don't realize how talented he was. Not just a race car driver, but the fabricating part was just unbelievable. Oh, our program ended up with a lot more pressure on it. Now we got burning boilers. They're expecting us to go and race for a championship.
So in 1997 and 1998, when Mike was continuing to run the Burnham Busch North car, Burnham then came on as a sponsor on the X6.
Well, we're both sponsored by Burnham Boilers, and Burnham, let it be known that the Busch North Series takes precedence over the modifieds.
We were kind of taking the back seat to the Busch car.
Kind of from there, the Busch North stuff for a while took precedence over the modified.
Michael worked full-time at the shop. Greg Zipadelli, who's now down south, was the crew chief at the time.
Pretty much did all we could do once the green flag dropped, then it's up to him, And these cars are, I don't know, I've never driven one. They just tell me that they're pretty easy to drive when the car's right.
Zippy was just such a hard worker.
He was really good with the geometry of how a race car was built.
I think when with Greg Zipadelli and they just they went in and they needed to redesign the front end on the Busch car.
One day I came into the shop and the two of them were on the floor with strings and magic markers, and they were laying out the whole front end of our cars.
They came back and they won a bunch of races.
The switch clicked and off it went at that point.
This doubleheader, well, it don't get any bigger than this for the NASCAR Featherlight Modified Tour and the Busch North Series. But let's zero in today and talk about what Mike Stefanik is trying to pull off.
Oh, Eli, he's trying to really be Hercules here this year. Can he continue that momentum he's had all season? I really think he can.
Dave Dion in the number 29 car leads the point standings right now by only 9 points. He's also a past winner here.
Michael and Dave, they just had that respect for one another. And that year, it was looking like Dave had the championship.
We went to Loudon and we blew a tire.
Dave Dion, a major problem. The right front is gone. It's taken out sheet metal. How about this for the championship to change around here?
Eli, they'll have to get that fender off there and get him back in this race somehow because, like you say, the point standing's up for grab here.
And that was basically, how Michael got ahead of him.
He goes from 9 up over Stefanik to 78 down.
Blowing that tire gave the championship to Mike.
Greg Zipadelli was the crew chief on the car. In the end of 97, he got the call to go to work for Roush, working on Jeff Burton's car.
Greg was really good at what he did, but who could hold him back? And he said, man, I got a chance to go to work for Roush. And he says, you got to go, man. This is what you want to do for a living, I mean, I don't want to be the one to hold you back. And me and Michael talked about it. They said, who should we get? Who should we get? Who should we get? We're going to hire a crew chief, but I had been crew chief in my whole life, taking care of my own race cars. And then Michael just says, nah, you just need to do it.
When Michael started racing for us and Julie spotted, I was in awe of how good she was at it.
I knew what he wanted to hear and what he didn't want to hear. He wasn't one, I've spotted for other people and they're like, well, let me know when they're like 10 car lengths behind me or count this down. And Michael didn't, he knew what he was doing. I was just an extra set of eyes for him.
He needed Julie to take a break here and there. And I got some of the venues that Julie didn't want to go to. So it ended up working out, and I spotted a lot of races for that 51 car that Mike Greci owned. And
it worked out really well at tracks. Like if Riverside had a doubleheader with the Busch North or Loudon had a doubleheader, all you got to do is go from garage to garage. You didn't have to go from plane to plane or helicopter to helicopter. Made life a lot easier.
I don't think anybody appreciated how difficult, not the racing would be, but the logistics.
You had two divisions that at that point were pretty much Northeast based. They weren't going long distances away from the Northeast, but it obviously still created some issues with travel.
They really got lucky because there was a lot of times when one race would get rained out, the other one was able to get in.
We had a race at Jennerstown that he couldn't make. He was racing up in New Hampshire, the Busch car. They were talking rain, so we talked about it as a crew, and we said, let's load the car up, and we're going to go to Jennerstown just in case he gets rained out. About 10 o'clock that morning, we're in Jennerstown sitting there with no driver, and we get a phone call that they got rained out in New Hampshire, and he was on his way.
There were places he wasn't supposed to be, that because of rain out, it would allow him to be there. It was like it was magical.
He got there, got some practice in. Mike come in to me and he says, Barry, he says, we're fast, but no good. You gotta nail it down for me. So I did a few things, got back in the car, ran some laps. I looked at the chart and we're like 5th or 6th on the chart. He says, don't worry about it, we'll be good. And I was amazed that he could pick out something that quick. And sure enough, we started 5th or 6th, and I think in 20 laps we're in the lead, and we just drove away.
He raced the 2 cars on the same weekend. That was very challenging because you can't send the Busch car in like you can send the modified in. They're much smaller tires.
Oh boy, that's getting awful close here as they head 3 wide down into turn 1.
Here goes Leighton. Oh, Stefanik and Santerre get together, and can Mike save it? He does save it.
A lot of credit goes to Michael and to Julie, who had to do all of the scheduling and all the logistics.
We were at Dover for qualifying the Busch North Series car, and at the same time, that was 4 o'clock, we took time. I had to be in Lee, New Hampshire to run the modified, which we're lining up for time trials at approximately 6:30. So I had Karras and my buddy Bob. He flew me up there to a waiting helicopter. The helicopter brought me right in the infield, and I swear there wasn't more than 4 cars in line, and then I just jumped in, went out and qualified, got done there, flew back to Dover, and ran that race the next day. And that's just a typical weekend. That was probably the most strategically placed weekend, but a lot of them were about as bad.
I think there was some thought that we might not be able to pull this off. So as it developed, it just became a cooler and cooler story to see.
We didn't know that we were making history. And that history is never going to be repeated. And there's part of me that thinks he knew that, but we didn't.
It was fascinating to watch it happen and to realize like you're watching history happen.
That had to be just an unbelievable season for everybody involved.
And I remember we went to Chili's for lunch, and we just couldn't believe this happened. And I remember we were just sitting there crying. I mean, I guess it was happy tears, but it was just like, can you believe this? It all fell into place. I don't think that will ever happen again.
Whenever the modifieds go to New Hampshire Motor Speedway, they are the race. I don't care if the Cup's on the schedule. I don't care if the IRL was there or just the standalone Busch Series. The modifieds are the show.
All eyes are on us. You usually have the Cup people there too, so you feel as though all eyes of the world are watching you.
When we were in New Hampshire, all the Cup guys would come look at our cars, and they were very interested in the cars because we went fast and we diced out. I mean, we would bump each other and draft by each other and be 3-4 lead changes in 1 lap. And those guys aren't used to doing that kind of racing.
Throughout Michael's career, he was always at his best when he was put under huge amount of pressure. The more pressure you put on him, the more he would perform. He didn't like that pressure. He would rather have a super easy win and cruise in. But if you put him under pressure, he would outperform. He would just do whatever he had to do. For this race, we go out and practice, and 1 lap later, the radiator cap loosened up, came off, going into turn 1.
Yeah, we crashed in very early practice. Going in 1, we lost the radiator hose and destroyed the car.
Needed front and rear clip, car was destroyed.
So we headed back home to get the other car ready. Mike got a hold of me before we left, and he says, Barry, he says, that motor in that car is awesome. He says, if anything, could you get it in the other car for me? I says, I'll see what I can do.
Barry takes off the valve cover and stuff, and it looked like that the valve might have got bent.
So we took the valve spring off and started operating on the motor a little bit, and we had about 5 thousandths run out in that valve. So I made a little gadget up, and we kept tweaking on it with a dial indicator and rotating the valve, and we finally got it pretty good.
Barry can build motors. He can do anything. I mean, honest to God, the guy can do anything. He's brilliant. There's no 2 ways about it.
So we changed motors, and we headed back to Loudon. I think we got back around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
Go back the next day. We couldn't qualify or anything. Dead last.
Another major story unfolded just yesterday morning during practice runs. Mike Stefanik's primary race car found itself into the wall. With no backup immediately available, Stefanik chose not to qualify and instead starts today dead last on the field, taking a past champion's provisional as the defending series champion.
He knew he was starting 40th at a track where overtaking was not easy, but obviously very, very possible. So I'm sure he knew he had the stuff to get to the front.
I'm really looking to methodically move up. I don't want to tear the wheels off, but we need to finish, but we need to finish and then go for the win. And I just like to get up, kind of up near the front and try to pit when all the leaders pit. If I can accomplish that, that'll be mission accomplished for the first half.
I think where it helped to have a guy like Mike behind the wheel was he wasn't going to lose his head. You know he'd be fast enough and you knew he wouldn't tear it up.
There's Stefanik right there. It took Stefanik a grand total of 19 green flag laps to get into the top 10. It has taken him 28 green flag laps to get into the top 5.
That's pretty amazing. Again, when you consider how hard it is to pass here, that's pretty awesome.
He was running just the outside and he was picking off cars left and right.
Stefanik has the blast furnace going. He has mowed him down. He's already up to 4th. It's not going to be very long before he's going to be challenging Mike Stefanik for the lead.
He was just unbelievable. He was on rails.
Oh, here he comes. He makes the move on the inside.
From last to first in 47 total laps and 35 laps of green flag racing. Mike Stefanik.
He definitely had a knack for that racetrack. I don't know what it was, but he definitely did.
Tom Baldwin slows on the racetrack. He brings out caution at lap number 80. The leaders are on pit road.
Mike Stefanik brings his car in, guys. They did not want to see this caution come out. Only 20 laps left to go in the race.
Not a lot of laps left, and Michael's like, we need tires. And we're all like, oh my Lord, how are you ever going to make it back?
He's having to give up an awful lot of track position, but I guess they felt like this was something that they had to do. The guys behind them are pitting also. So they're working on the left rear right now. Stefanik is down and away.
97 laps will go up on the board this time to settle into this 100-lapper. Reggie Ruggiero, Tim Mangus. Those are the front two trying to pull away.
That's 40 there in the 30 on the inside of green and white. Right back, Stefanik on the outside, getting a great run off turn 2.
Here they come back off on the battle for the lead. All of these machines scrambling back towards 2 laps to go.
Didn't need to lead all the laps. You only need to lead the last one. That's the one that counts.
As they come towards the finish here, white flag is in the air. Everybody stacks up behind the race leader. And here they come to the stripe. Reggie Ruggiero, Tim Mangus, and here comes Mike Stefanik.
And now he's to the outside of Reggie, going off of turn 2, and clears him.
Great runoff. You can see side by side. Ruggiero on the inside, Stefanik on the outside. We have a spin coming off turn 4, but I think he righted it back under power.
When it was time to throw it to the outside and just drive your ass off, he made that happen too.
Just amazed what he could do in a race car.
And here they come to the stripe. Checkered flag is out. Stefanik wins.
And actually wins the race by about 2 car lengths, which I think shocked everybody, including Mike a little bit.
That was one of the best shows I've ever seen as far as the guy picking through traffic. It was just unbelievable.
Oh, we weren't looking too good there when they kept wrecking and going back to caution and then oiling the track all down and laps ticking by. I'm like, oh my God, I think we screwed up. But what a dramatic finish, right with the Reg again, same old, nothing changes.
I don't think the X6 was a dominant car. What happened was Mike pitted with like 20 to go and put 3 tires on. And that made the difference at the end. He ended up just driving by us because he had fresher tires. And that was the only reason he won. He didn't have a dominant car, but, tires at the end make a big difference.
So when you're able to win at New Hampshire, what Michael did with great regularity, it was big because that was the Daytona of the North for the modifieds. Michael did have the most wins there on the tour.
Clinched your championship in Thompson, Connecticut by winning your 13th race of the season, breaking a record that Richie Evans set a while ago, and a record that a lot of people thought would be very tough to match. What did getting that record mean to you?
Well, I was a friend of Richie Evans, and I looked up to him. He was truly the king of the modified racing.
Michael was actually embarrassed because we were winning so much. He
He didn't want to break Richie's record.
He never thought that he was above Richie. I mean, he looked up to Richie. He said Richie was the king. And I mean, it was kind of neat to be able to beat one of Richie's records.
It was the perfect combination. Everything meshed together, from the driver to the team. Everything they did seemed to flow perfectly.
When we got to the track, Michael would never, ever tell me what to change on a car. He'd just leave it up to me. And we had such great respect for each other. It was something that you don't find in today's racing.
Michael had built those cars that Barry had, so that shorthand was Michael's comfort.
We'd be at a track where they were running the Busch car and the modified, and we'd practice in a day, and I knew what we needed to do after practice. And Michael would come back from practicing the Busch car and get in the modified, and he'd be sliding into the car, and he'd look over at me and he'd say, "Are we all set?" And I say, "We're all set, Mike." And that's all he needed to hear. He didn't ask me what we did, anything about it. He just had that faith in us to do them right, you know.
I think it was probably one of those perfect meldings of, driver and team. They just fit right in. I think they probably needed a guy like Mike. And for Mike, it obviously ended up being a pretty good place to go as a team.
Our team was like the New England Patriots. Just like the New England Patriots. Our color of the car was the same. Mike Stefanik was Tom Brady. Okay? And Barry Kuhnel was Belichick. And we had a cast of crew guys, okay, that were just like the Patriots player. If one guy was good, was down that day, another guy would pick it up.
2 championships in the same year, 2 years in a row. Do you realize how rare what you've accomplished is?
No, I'm not a big guy on looking at records and stuff. It's just, hey, that's what we do in New England. Those are the cards that were dealt me, and I just make the best of the situation up there, and I'm happy. I mean, who's not happy that's winning, a lot of races and being involved with 2, very fantastic run organizations, the Busch North Series car and the X6 car.
It was hard to see Michael leave because we could have gone farther, but I think it was time for all of us to move on. I went down south and worked at Tony's, and Michael got a ride in the truck series.
At the end of '98, I believe it was Dennis Huth from NASCAR was kind of helped Michael along because he won the championships in '97 and '98.
He was with NASCAR, and they're like, you got to find him a ride down there. He got the opportunity. I believe he ran out at Las Vegas in the last race in the truck series, and I think he finished 8th.
Over the winter, he started talking. Dale Phelan owned the truck, and they just put a deal together to run in '99.
And when he had the opportunity to go truck racing, I said, man, you got to try it, Michael. God, you don't get these opportunities very often.
I knew a little bit about the team that he was driving for, a gentleman by the name of Dale Phelan. I had tested a truck in '96 for that team, and they were fairly new on the truck series. And when I heard they had hired Mike Stefanik, I was excited for Mike. I knew that he could do a good job, and it was his chance to get down south and get in a good ride.
First race was at Homestead in '99.
Obviously, I was watching his first race like everybody else, and he finished second.
Mike Wallace in front of Mike Stefanik. Compton's not going to be a factor unless these two make a mistake through turns 3 and 4. Coming out of 4. Miami has seen its share of hurricanes. Today's storm is named Mike Wallace.
I can remember seeing Julie running up to him and hugging him and all that stuff, and that was a pretty big moment.
I'm far from a veteran, but racing with them guys, they know how to race. This is a tough truck series. Miami Homestead, great racetrack, pretty fast. Not what I'm accustomed to, but I'm just so happy. I really am. I mean, I haven't been so happy about a second, to tell you the truth.
It doesn't surprise me. Mike did well right off the bat, and hopefully at that time, we were all thinking, he would get an opportunity.
Finished second in the first race. Everybody in the modified and Busch North area are going, this is absolutely great. This is going to be great things for him.
Coming into KOSZELA's, because I worked at KOSZELA's at the speed shop for 30 years. I remember him coming in that next Monday morning and looking at him and saying, I go, man, you made it. You're all over TV.
And we talked not long after that. I think he thought that was kind of going to be a vault to something next, and it just never materialized. Working as NASCAR, one of my first trips was out to Evergreen. He ends up needing a spotter. So there I am sitting in the bleachers at Evergreen Speedway hiding with a radio on, and I knew that team was a little bit of a struggle because I remember a quick conversation we had on the radio that day. I'm like, you need to try a little bit of a different line on entry here and down into 3 and something, and the response was, I already did. And you could tell when his teeth were gritted and everything that he was giving it everything, and it just wasn't there.
And before the season ended, everybody knew that, they weren't going to be back. And it's really a shame because, it was a new team to start off, the Carlin team. And Mike showed he could run with these guys. So the second wasn't a fluke. It's just too bad it didn't pan out.
It was fun. I just wish he could have continued because he just got his feet wet in it, and I thought he did well.
The NASCAR Truck Series was still a fairly new deal at that time, and NASCAR had a huge interest in seeing it survive. So NASCAR, I think, encouraged and not necessarily leaned on, but strongly encouraged any Cup Series and Busch Series team owners that had the resources. We wouldn't mind a whole lot if you ran a truck team too. So it was harder for the average so-called independent team, which Mike's would have been at that time, to go down and make hay against those guys.
It was not an easy year. Michael would come in the pits. He'd come out having lost positions on pit road. He'd gain them back on the racetrack. It was a very frustrating season for him. But Rookie of the Year was a very deserved honor.
They did well. I mean, he won Rookie of the Year.
I don't remember where he finished in points. I think he was like 12th or 13th that year.
I can't recall a time where Mike had a bad race or did anything dumb or looked bad in that truck. I think the team, through no fault of its own and with no disrespect to them, I think, they were probably just outclassed by those Cup-affiliated teams in that period.
Most teams were out of Charlotte. They were out of a place in South Carolina, so they weren't able to use the resources of other teams for help.
He got everything he could get out of that truck. It was a decent team, but it wasn't a Hendrick or a Roush.
There was enough of a filtering down of resources and crewmen and things like that the truck teams that were affiliated with Cup cars were going to win.
He was down south for a couple years.
Then he gets a part-time deal in this number 90 Busch car.
Yeah, they weren't like one of the top teams.
All the pieces of the puzzle weren't there. They tried to make it happen. And Mike knew, if you can't do it right, you're not going to win. And Mike knew how to do it right. And I think it frustrated him to see it not being done right. So he just assumed not be a part of it. It doesn't make you look good.
He probably could have found another deal after that. I'm not sure that he wanted to.
You talk about the amount of work that goes into trying to make a career in NASCAR. Took my whole entire life and put it on hold. Didn't want to get married, didn't want to have kids, wanted to be able to load up a U-Haul truck and leave the next day after I got the phone call, and that's what I did. I just got lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. I promoted the heck out of myself. One of the goals that I had was, back when we had the speedway scene and area auto racing, and you had all these publications, unlike we have today. My goal was, I didn't have a lot of money, and I knew that if I could get on the cover of all these magazines all the time, that somebody's going to say, every time we pick this up, who is this guy? And it's kind of what happened. Mike, on the other hand, he kind of waited for the opportunity to present itself instead of really going out after it.
Mike never really promoted himself, I guess. And I think he was sort of content where he was. I think, he was enjoying his life with Julie and his kids, and he was happy. So did he have to go cup racing to be successful? I think Mike felt he was successful.
And he wasn't ever going to play for anybody. You have to play the game. You have to do a lot of commercials. You have to say a lot of things you don't necessarily mean. You got to pretend you like people you don't. He just didn't have that component to him.
Obviously, he took some opportunities that came to him. But I don't think Mike needed that to be a happy guy.
Mike could have cared less if there was a camera in victory lane or not. He did his job that day if he won, and that's how it was supposed to be in his mind.
I don't know. I think his heart was always up here in the Northeast. And, he didn't want us to just pack up and move, which if he really wanted, that's, I guess, what you have to do.
And he never got the opportunity again after that. Came back up here and kicked everybody's butt again.
Nazareth was a very unique racetrack. Had a dog leg in the middle. It was flat, and 3 and 4 was off camber. You actually went the other way on the racetrack, and it was very fast.
For a number of years, that was a traditional event for the Busch Series and the modifieds, because Nazareth needed some inventory of content of racing.
Barry Kuhnel went to work for Gary Credi. I think he was out of Pennsylvania, New York, somewhere in there, and Hirschman was driving for him, the 25 and the 26 cars.
Yeah, that's Tony Hirschman's crew chief, Barry Kuhnel. He's the trademark behind these cars. He builds them himself. He takes cars, changes the front end design, the rear end design, puts these aerodynamic bodies on them, and that's why they're so fast, because they work really hard on these cars.
We had the 2 cars, and Michael gave a shout to us that he'd like to run Nazareth if he could get the ride. So we did both cars, Hirschman in one and Michael in the other.
And what a race in store for us today. 40 drivers that take part in this 100-lap race. One of the special surprises for us and the fans that are sticking around to watch this one is Mike Stefanik.
I think we were qualified 1 and 2 with both cars.
There's your top 5. Tony Hirschman with a new track record. Mike Stefanik, team cars, front row.
In the middle of the race, I got bumped, whether we pitted for tires and come back up. So I was able to get back up to the front.
Ruggiero again looks slow going into 3. Looks like he's going to take Stefanik with him as they're underneath Rob Summers in car 55.
Reggie and Mike were both masters at them tracks, and they battled hard in places.
There's the 26th of Mike Stefanik now in 5th. Stefanik again sat outside front row. He's got 58 career wins on the tour. He is definitely a threat.
It was a tricky racetrack, but you always went good on the big track.
Stefanik looking low on Christopher, coming down the front stretch off of turn 4.
Good move there by Stefanik under Petty Christopher. What a move.
We raced hard, but we didn't go hard enough to take each other out.
Looking inside on Reggie.
Coming off of turn 4 with 8 to go. Stefanik off of turn 1 takes the lead.
And here comes Mike. Mike was able to get by me.
As Ruggiero goes high on Stefanik coming into 4.
Crosses him over. Look at that, Doug. He crossed him over. Now he's looking on the bottom. What a move. That was a good move.
6 laps left as we've got ourselves a heck of a battle for first. No surprise. Stefanik, Ruggiero, and Christopher have somewhat broken away from Jerry Martini, who's in 4th. And they come by the stripe, 5 laps left as Ruggiero again looks to make the move.
Oh, did you see how loose Reggie got there? Wow. He had the car all crossed up. Now he's fighting on the inside of him.
Inside, coming down on the kink. Ruggiero backs out of it.
The modifieds are very well suited for that track because you could pass.
Well, this is shaping up to be a heck of a race.
The outside of the backstretch.
He's looking right to the outside. Gonna try to cross him over here. Move. Oh, he had the left front hanging right off the racetrack.
He was either losing his tires. I was like pushing him all the way around the racetrack.
3 laps to go. What a battle for first place.
Reggie could have, I think, maybe have gotten him had it gone green.
I was confident I could get him, but rain came.
I don't think they can go any longer. We got a yellow. The rain's coming down too hard.
Yellow flag out, 2 laps remaining.
That ended the race. Made me mad, but that's racing.
I told him 10 to go. I said, man, I don't know, some things just never change. Here it is, me in the reg. And I said, I don't know, we'll just see what happens. But I got a good run. I think Reggie was just a little slow getting started. Probably would have come back and
smoked me. I don't know. So I was glad. I said, hey, I got a good idea. Why don't they just call this thing? So, and then the rains came down. They did.
That kind of got excited about the modifieds again, and phones started ringing again from all the modified guys up here wanting them to run their car for the following year.
I think the timing of Mike Stefanik and Art Berry getting together couldn't have been better. Number one, they were two old school guys. Mike had long since developed a real knack for long distance races, which the tour was all long distance races. You knew that Art had well prepared stuff, and it was also a period when you could still experiment a little bit with the bodies. And Mike was a guy that was always happy to experiment, and Art, being a body man, I don't think was ever afraid of trying something new. But also, if 10 guys were going to try something new, Art was going to have the prettiest one.
Art's always had great cars, always had great drivers. You knew right away it was going to be a good pairing.
There was a weird dynamic that it just fit with Mike and Art to come together. Not so much that they had the same personalities or anything like that. It just felt right in short track racing.
When the opportunity came to put him in the car, my father just said, we got to do whatever we've got to do to make this work. And John Lombardi was the same way. He's like, we got to make this happen. We got to get this guy in the car. They approached me about crew chief in the car and this and that. To be honest with you, when Mike first started driving for us, I was like kind of torn up a little bit when they told me they would look at him, because he comes across as a little snooty, I guess would be a good word to put it. But it's not. When you get working with him, it had nothing to do with that. It's when Mike is at a racetrack, he's there for one thing and one thing only, to win that race.
When Mike came back to modified racing after his stint down south, everybody paid attention because Mike was a good driver.
Art was easy to drive for, and Mike was not an over-aggressive driver, meaning the car's going to come home with all 4 tires on it.
When we first started together, we had the car we've always been running. We went first race out, I think it was Rougemont, and I know we finished second, but we weren't good enough to win. And we came home and we discussed a few things, and for the next 3 or 4 races, we kept making small changes to the car and getting better. I remember a night at Chemung, he was running second. We gave it up on the last lap. He ends up finishing third, and you would have thought he destroyed the car. He was so mad. And he says, if those 2 points come and bite me in the ass at the end of the year, he says, I am not going to forgive myself.
As the year got progressed, he was going fast every week and winning races. And it's like, wow, we got to pay attention here.
He definitely was all about consistency. I think we were pretty good about it. I mean, we had one bad race at the end that kind of made it tight, the points in the end. But other than that, I think it was just a pretty consistent year.
Art put his time in, was a great guy. Everybody loved him. I don't know anybody that didn't like Art. So to see him get those championships was a big, big deal.
Wasn't surprised at all that he came back and didn't miss a beat. I mean, at that point, he was still supremely talented.
The following year, they came out with that silver car.
Mike approached us about putting some of the stuff he used to run in the car.
The red car was Art's car. They built that, and he actually took the front end off the X6 and the spindles and the E-frames and stuff and brought it down to Kenny, and they kind of built that silver car together.
Me and him sat on the floor downstairs here and plotted the front end out full scale, no computers, no nothing, strings and pieces of tape on the floor. Came up with a game plan, and we got running pretty good with that.
That was championship number 2.
I listened to people for years talk about Mike Stefanik and his ability to build the cars and his knowledge of building the cars. And it's the funny part is when I quit driving for a while to do this with him, I learned so much more about driving the car from him because he's just such a smart race car driver.
It was like she's part of my deal. And I would almost bet that she didn't know she was going to be brought up there, which makes it even cooler,
It just kind of, I don't know, I don't like to be in the spotlight. And so, I was looking at that and kind of, okay, what do I do?
Everybody knows I'd do anything without Julie and racing, that's for sure. And I certainly wouldn't leave her sitting down there.
I mean, we were best friends.
It's a husband tipping his hat to not just a wife, but a friend, a trusted partner.
We didn't fight over anything. It was like if he won, it was a great ride home. If he didn't, it could be quiet. But he never hollered at me.
The trick to this speech deal is have just the right amount of alcohol flowing through you before you get up here. So you're not too nervous and you're not too mushy. You don't want to start crying.
He was more happy for Art winning the championship.
But with that said, I think I have quite enough in me, so this is to you, Art. Congratulations.
Coming around over the winter 2003, Art told him, he said, I don't want to lose you, but, I got this kid with all this money offering to drive the car. And, Michael understood.
Mike accepting a situation like that, I can see easily. Racing was changing. There were guys coming in with money. And I think Mike just accepted that this is part of racing in that era. It wasn't backyard stuff anymore. It all cost money. And I'm sure he had enough respect for Art and enough of a friendship for Art to not want to stand in the way of something like that for Art and his team.
There was no hard feelings, really. It was just the way racing was headed.
He pretty much started that he was going to go back Busch racing again, full time.
You came back in this series after taking, 4 years away from this series. How much has it changed in that time?
It's actually changed an awful lot. These types of cars, these strut front end cars were everywhere. Now there's just a few of them left. The cars weigh 200 pounds more. The compression rule went up to 12 to 1. The car's 200 pounds heavier, about 100 more horsepower. And everybody's really sharpened up their program. It's very competitive.
Stefanik giving him just a little bit of pressure. Now Stefanik was going to try to the outside. Looked like he changed his mind. Now he's going to go to the inside.
He did the old crossover, went to the outside, got a good run through the center of the corner. Going to be side-by-side going off forward.
So there will be a change of the lead this time by to the line. Stefanik hasn't led yet, but he will get Kelly Moore on this lap by, and the Burnham-Borley Chevrolet is now our leader.
In 2005, Steve and Peg Griswold ended up owning the team that I managed, and Mike was one of the drivers. And it kind of put myself, Mike Stefanik, and Brad Layton together as teammates. And I know people had asked me about, Mike and I, it come down to us being very competitive on the series. I think we ran 1 and 2 in points most of the year, and that's how we ended up. And I won the championship that year, but it really could have gone either way.
The Busch North cars, they went to Irwindale Speedway one year in California, and it was the Busch North, Busch West cars out there, and it was a big deal. Toyota was sponsoring it. There was a lot of money to win. You got a Toyota truck, you want a truck, it was when Toyota was really getting into it, and he qualified in the back, and just his normal self saving the tires. Here he comes at the end of the race.
That time, Stefanik had the lead. Yes, he did. 14 to go. That's the lap Mike Stefanik led tonight, and here he goes. And look now, on the bottom, and trouble in turn 2. We got another crash.
The caution came out, Michael slowed down, and Olsen got into the back of him, spun him around.
Mind you, this is under caution.
And Olsen taps Stefanik, and Stefanik goes around. Now it's after the caution. So he's got to get going to hang on to his spot.
He didn't hit anything, but he had to stop to get going.
Mike Stefanik's coming up to get his spot back. See how they score it. The ruling would be NASCAR's discretion whether or not a car was able to maintain reasonable speed after the caution.
Yeah, it looks like the 61 just got on the brakes a little heavy right there to try to keep off of him and just shove the nose up and just barely got him.
Yeah, that left front wheel almost stopped, and when the wheels are stopped, when the front wheels are stopped, you're not steering. Now, since Stefanik was not part of the cause of the caution, he may well still be the leader in this race.
Yeah, they just called it, Mike, 55 to the tail end.
Well, that's kind of a harsh call.
So then they told Michael he had to go to the rear. It's like, it was caution and someone spun me out.
That's a hard call to make. It's a hard call to make. It's a hard call to take both ways.
The one that he got screwed on, yeah, he did. There's no doubt about it. I was sitting home watching it and screaming, texting or calling Julie at the time, like, what the frig is going on out there? And
he's been told that he has to get to the back. He doesn't want to do it. He's staying out there at this point, and there comes the black flag for Mike Stefanik. 12 laps away from maybe winning this.
I remember I was spotting. I think I started crying. Michael was very upset, and then he got on the radio and he says, "I really don't feel like going to the rear." And Steve Griswold told him to park it.
Mike Stefanik has said, "Guys, if they put me back there, I'm going to park it. I deserve the lead. The caution was out, and I got dumped."
And then they went and interviewed him.
I'm not going to the back. It's 10 laps to go. I'm not tearing up a great race car. Vernon Boilers had a wicked fast race car. And the yellow's out. I see the light on, and the next thing you know, my back end comes up in the air, and around I go. It's the second time it happened to me under caution. There's no reason for it, and I'm not paying the penalty for it. So my owner told me park that thing, and that's what I did.
So at the end of the 2005 Grisco racing season, Steve and Peg Griswold had decided to take all of the teams on a cruise. So there was 76 of us team members that all went on a Carnival cruise at the end of the year. We celebrated with Steve and Peg for winning another championship. And we got home, and Steve Griswold called and said that Burnham Boilers had called, and NASCAR had changed up the schedule for the 2006 season. The Busch North Series was going to be racing at Loudon, New Hampshire on Fridays because of all the other events that were going on there. And Burnham was well known for having basically all their employees at the races every year. And they decided that they couldn't take 1,500 employees away from a Friday, which was a part of their work week. So unfortunately, Steve said that Burnham was going to be going away. And he decided that 2005 winning the championship, which is what he really wanted to do, that would be the end of the Grisco racing team. So as we knew it, and unfortunately, it was the end of an era. I believe that was the last year he drove in the North Series. He had some other options, and he was going to continue racing modifieds.
The Flamingo car was a Riverside Park car that Chris Kopech drove. Was always a front-running car.
Sly somehow got hooked up with Chris Kopech, who raced Riverside Park.
Chris Kopech ran the team, raced the car, ran the whole thing. And Chris had actually purchased some cars from Mike.
Chris bought the 89 championship car from Michael. After the 91 season, they ended up buying the 91 car from Michael as well. So they ended up buying both of the 15 cars.
They actually opened up a snowmobile shop back then, so Chris's time was being split a little bit. So I came to work full-time on the cars. And then we had a race at Thompson. It was a real bad wreck on the backstretch.
Well, it happened when Chris Kopech got hurt at Thompson one year and just really couldn't drive anymore.
Chris ended up getting a concussion, so he needed to take some time off from racing. And we needed a driver. So, I was friends with Mike.
I didn't realize the relationship between Sly and Mike. Sly come to me and said, "I got a driver for us." I said, "Who's that?" He said, "Mike Stefanik." It was like, wow.
And we figured it'd be a good fit for him to jump in and temporarily take the seat while Chris was recovering from that. Chris recovered from his injury. Chris got back in the car, so Mike was out again. And Chris ended up getting involved in another wreck. Eric Sanderson decided he didn't want Chris to get hurt any more than that, so we ended up putting Mike in the car.
Mike called me one day. He says, "Well, I got good news and bad news." I says, "The good news is I can race full-time for you. The bad news is I don't have a Busch ride anymore." So that's how we got hooked up.
I think everybody sort of knew Michael's a good driver and Eric Sanderson's a good car owner, and that it would be a good pairing for both of them.
When Michael drove the 16, the dynamics of the team was such that Michael wasn't there to work on the car all the time.
Flamingo Motorsports was like an hour and a half from us in Coventry, so pretty much Michael, was, he called it a helmet bagger. He just, he was buddies with Sly and had all the trust in all the guys up there, not just Sly, but that's how the whole scenario unfolded, was Michael and Sly.
They just knew each other. They knew what the other person was going to do. So there was a lot of confidence.
Everybody thought this was a match made in heaven. And it was, because of their history with the Jack KOSZELA car.
The equipment was new. The team was new to him, but the main guy wasn't. And obviously they had success there too.
And you figured right off the start, they're going to be a team that you're going to be contending with.
won that first race.
Down to the final lap. Does Costo have one more trick left in his glove compartment? Here he comes, down low against Stefanik. Contact between the two cars. Who will get to the line first? It will be Mike Stefanik. Shakes off the contact and wins the icebreaker.
Gotta thank Eric. Give me this opportunity to come back here. I was rideless after my Busch deal, and I don't know, we're going to chase points in this series, see where we end up, but it's a great way to get started.
I think that was the only one that they had that year.
He was just totally consistent. Finished every lap of every race.
We just had a good year and things just went smooth.
I decided to give him a hand and went back and helped him, and Michael won another championship that year.
You know, there's only two 9-time NASCAR champions, Richie Evans and Mike Stefanik.
He wasn't looking forward to beating Richie's record by any means.
So a lot of people asked him, how does it feel to tie Richie Evans' record? And he always hated that question.
I'm sure he loved the fact that he shared that stat with Richie, because their names are going to be mentioned together forever. But I don't think Mike himself looked at himself on that level.
He never felt that he was as good as Richie.
And I just don't think he wanted to step on Richie's toes in any way.
He would always say, there's Richie, and then there's me.
Richie was outstanding, and Michael was too in his own right, but he didn't like being compared to Richie. He wanted Richie to be off on his own as the supreme race car driver.
Yeah, everything just worked. We had a good team.
We finished that season with the same front bumper we started with, which is incredible for a modified team.
So after we won the championship with Mike, it just seemed like business as usual. We're going racing, we're winning championships, we're having fun. Got a great team. All the guys are working hard. Everything's great. Racing's great.
And I think they won fall final the next year, and it was just built on consistency. Michael and Sly being back together, it seemed almost like peanut butter and jelly for a little bit, and then it just got sideways.
Finishes just started dropping off, and the wins weren't coming as easy. You know, next few seasons were a struggle.
It seemed like no matter what we did, the car went backwards.
I can remember we went to Mansfield. I don't remember what year that was, but Mansfield ran a tour race, and the mufflers were off the car, and he couldn't hear me, so it was useless. Like, it was a wasted trip, and we were mad at one another, you know, because he's screaming, I can't hear you, and I'm like, I'm screaming in the mic, I got nothing left. So, you know, there was some frustrating days with it.
You know, I always say racing is like a 3-year marriage.
A divorce of a marriage that you would never think was going to happen.
If you look at most race teams, they last about 3 years, and we lasted a lot longer than that with Mike. You know, we would talk about it like what are we doing wrong, or what do we need to do to change it? And I remember winning a race at Thompson with Mike, and we're up in the clubhouse, and he said, enjoy this moment. He goes, because you don't know if you're ever going to get another one. At the time, I was like, what do you mean we're not going to get another one? It's like, we win races, you know, we just do. And I know exactly what he meant right now, because they start to slip away, and you don't know how to get back there.
He was always wondering why they were struggling. They were finishing races. It just, they didn't have that speed.
Still doing well, but not up to our expectations or anyone else's. I mean, I remember coming back from a racetrack, and we'd finish third, and somebody would come up to me and say, like, what happened? You know, what happened at Stafford? What happened at Loudon? I'd be like, what do you mean what happened? They're like, well, yeah, you finished third. I'm like, well, nothing happened. It's a very competitive series out there. Yeah, that's what happened.
The rumors were out there. You know, everybody kind of knew that things weren't working.
Rumors start, and once the rumors start, it's hard to stop it.
He had already heard that Ryan Preece was going to bring some money to the team next year. He'd heard that. And Michael had been saying, I don't think I'm going to be doing this much longer. So there was a lot of things coming together.
He knew what was going on. He wasn't dumb. And that's why I think he felt betrayed by it. And I think that's why he handled it the way he did.
People were looking at it like things are slipping away. And I guess, you know, when you're not winning, you're looking at it that way too.
You could tell there was tension in the garage area.
It's a sensitive thing because there's so many people and personalities involved.
Everybody felt it. Everybody saw it. Everybody knew something was going to happen. Something had to happen here.
Michael, even though he didn't say a lot, You could tell he was not happy with the situation.
Eventually, talk came about, like, we need to do something different. Something needs to change.
I think that they lost trust. The chemistry wasn't there anymore. And usually when that happens, it's either the crew chief or the driver that gets changed. And in this case, it was the driver.
After 10 years, I just made a decision to make a change.
Eric decided that we were going to make a change, and I know he talked to Mike about it, and it was right before the last race of the season.
I think it was on a Wednesday. Eric had called Michael, this was before the World Series, and said that, he was going to make a change for the following year.
I can't speak for Mike, obviously, that he was probably hurt inside that I let him go.
And Michael's like, no, I think you already made your mind up. You don't want me there. Why don't we just end this now? And
he decided not to run the last race of the season with us, and I understand. I mean, it was a hard deal for all of us.
I think that's perfectly in line with his personality. Not to make a fuss about it, but to be wounded enough by it that you said, let's not do it next year, let's do it now.
He drove because he wanted to make a living driving that race car. So when that came to a screeching halt, it hurt him for sure.
I think any of us would have our pride wounded in that same exact situation.
You've got a veteran, 9 championships. How do you tell them, thanks for the wins, but we're going to look down the road and see what else we can do?
If I know Michael felt betrayed, there's no doubt in my mind on that. I think he still thought he was capable and was getting a bad rap, and it didn't work out in his favor.
I think that was a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and then we put the deal together with Eddie to run his cars.
He had just gotten released from the 16 car, and between myself, Skippy, and Mike,
we threw a bunch of stuff together. Ed, we ran Ed's car at Thompson, renumbered it to 86. So we got to the Thompson, and Michael's like, can you go over to the 16 and get my helmet and fire suit out of the truck? And I went over there, and Sly was at the trailer, and I said, hey, I need his stuff, and they grabbed it to me, and I said, Sly, you didn't even call him. You guys are best buddies, and you haven't even called him.
My girlfriend at the time, Sharon, said, you really need to call Mike. You need to talk to him. You guys need to work this out. And she's right. She's 100% right. And I couldn't bring myself to make that phone call. What do I say to him? I wanted to call him and say, like, hey, Mike, like, what's up? But yeah, I know what's up, and he knows what's up. So how do you get through that? And yeah, it was hard. I mean, to this day, I look back at things and I wish things could have been different. I wish we could have turned the team around. I wish we could have figured out what was wrong. I mean, I started my racing career pretty much with Mike Stefanik, and the run we had of, I don't know how many years it was, we were, like the best of friends, and it really hurt our friendship. It wasn't the same anymore.
Mike came one day and raced with us on our track, and he had a good time, and then we got to be friends. Then we had a couple of race cars, modifieds, and we asked Mike if he wanted to drive one. They were old Sheba cars that Jeff Fuller drove.
And towards the end of, Michael's career, I think driving Eddie's 66, just kind of saved his career, gave him a little bit of confidence, because when he was in the 16, he was just so down on himself. But we'd go run the MRS races or the open races with Eddie's 66.
I think Michael had fun racing with Eddie's car. It was like a return to when the shop was on the corner there. It was close to home. They worked on the car together. They did what they wanted.
There was no pressure. Ed just they wanted to go out and win races.
Mike seemed to enjoy driving our car. He always told us every time we go to the track, it's always fast.
Eddie bought a good motor. We had all good stuff here, and it was just kind of back to old school racing.
He had never worked with our crew chief before, Brad LaFontaine. They were always rivals.
There was a guy, Chris Auer, that had a modified. He was buying parts from Brad. Basically, Brad put Eddie and Chris Auer together to run the tour for 2012.
I drove up to Brad LaFontaine's shop, Northeast Race Car, and I walked in, and he looked at me, he goes, what are you doing here? I said, I came to talk to you. We went in and sat down and talked, and then we started talking about the tour. And he goes, you and Ed Marceau would really work well together. He goes, he wants to do some part-time, and you kind of wanted to do some. He goes, and if you two of you got together, you could probably run a whole year and really go well. Well, Ed lives right around the corner, so Ed drove right over, and we sat there and we talked it out how we would do it. And we'd rotate races and which ones he wanted to do and us.
Chris had his cars, Eddie had his car.
And we put it together where we came as a team together and we were going to run that year together.
Ended up winning at Loudon that year.
When it finally went over the checkered flag, nobody really knew who won. So the place was kind of at standstill, and both cars, Ronnie and Mike, were waiting to go to the winner's circle, and then all of a sudden the tower put the 66 number up, and the place kind of erupted that Mike Stefanik won the race. And it was pretty special.
I was watching it on the computer, and they showed it. Look, it was a photo finish, and I had to wait like everybody else. I was very nervous. And then to find out he won was awesome.
I don't know if you ever saw the picture. He won by 0.004 or something. It was the most incredible race. I wasn't there.
He called her when he was on his way home from Loudon after our win.
And he was elated. Your old washed up brother.
Your little old washed up modified brother got another big win up there at NHIS today. Got a pretty nice fuzzy, warm feeling right now.
It was very exciting. I mean, I had some friends that have been in racing their whole life that came to me after and said it was the best race show they've ever seen. They loved it.
Wild race. Beat the crate motor that was unbeatable by 0.003 of a second. Oh, yeah, just another walk in the park.
And I kept that on my phone because it was his voice, and it captured exactly how he always felt after he won. He was just so happy about that.
You know, Michael raced against Tony, obviously, and, you know, for some reason, Michael just kind of took Matt under his wing a little bit, and, you know, he just always liked the kid.
Going into like around 2006, 2007, I was winning races different places, and Mike would say to me, he said, I seen you won a ROC race at Chemung last week. And then he'd say, are you going to count that? And I would, it's like, what do you say? I mean, this guy's accomplished, done it all. It still continued for years. You know, I had won the North-South shootout, and he would still, I don't know if I'd count that, he'd say.
You haven't won a tour race yet? Are you going to count those? So, you know, I think when Michael won Seacock in the MRS race with the 66,
turned on the laptop, the first thing that popped up is a picture of Mike Stefanik in Victory Lane at Seacock Speedway for an MRS race. Got my phone out, Stefanik, called him up very seriously, said hello. And I said, are you going to count that? And he burst out laughing.
I remember Michael chuckling as hard as ever, you know.
You know, going back and forth with Ed and I, and at the end of the year, I kind of wanted to step it up a little bit and run the full year and kind of take it upon myself. And I called Ed and we talked, and, you know, and Ed understood, and Ed was going to run open shows and still use Mike, and I was going to concentrate more on the tour.
Not a ton of people knew a lot about Chris, and he came in kind of guns blazing and spent a lot of money, put all the right parts and pieces together, got the right people together.
And Mike really helped us excel right out of the box.
You know, for a startup team, that's a good guy to have in the car.
And created a team that was dominant right out of the gate.
When I first heard they were going to have the modifieds for the first time at a brand new track at Daytona, I was retired. I was thinking to myself, I'm like, man, I would just love to be in the record books, because being a modified guy and accomplishing a lot in the modifieds out of New England, if my kids look back in the record books, they're going to see that you also ran Daytona in a modified.
So the Battle of the Beach was held off of the big tracks turn 2. They created a half mile or third mile track on the backstretch.
He was very excited about going to Daytona because everybody wants to race at Daytona. But this was a makeshift track that they built using part of the backstretch.
Like a little flat bull ring it was different. It was different, let's put it that way.
That race at Daytona and that mock track that we had to run on, I can't help but say it. I think it was a joke, and a bad joke at that. should have really never did it.
But at the same time, they were also getting publicity that they felt like NASCAR wasn't always the best at giving them big time publicity, and this was really being publicized as a big deal. I think guys looked at it on both sides of the spectrum.
NASCAR had good intentions in putting together that little short track on the back straightaway of the big track. I think their heart was in the right place. I think it was a bad showcase for a division that typically can put on a lot of side-by-side racing anywhere. You're put at a place that's very flat, hard to go the long way around a guy. You almost had to either follow the guy or try to get under him coming out of the corner, or, as is more common today, knock a guy out of the way.
So the night before the modified race, they had the pro stock race, late model race or whatever it was there, and Kyle Larson was in one of the late models, and he, came down to the end of the race. He was in second, came off a 4, put his nose under the guy in front of him, and just never lifted, cleaned the guy out.
But here they go, crucial times into turn number 3. Falk trying to be steady. He puts the bumper, Larson to Falk. They rocket down the straightaway. He spins him out. Larson wins at Daytona.
There had been a lot of wrecks earlier in the week, and it seemed like that's the way things go. Don't worry about it. And so he wasn't happy with the tone of the whole week.
Michael was he wasn't a Dale Earnhardt fan, because Dale started the bump and run, and Michael says, I will not do it. I wouldn't race if I had to do it that way.
He never dumped people. He went around you. He would drive you clean, and he drove the old school method. When my nose is up to your door, I own you. But until then, you own me. I'm not going to dump you. And other drivers knew this.
He was always up for a good hard race, but he would never clean anybody out.
He'll run you as hard as you want to run. It's side by side, but he'll never dump you.
He hated the whole bump and run scenario, what everybody talked about, and always said, you shouldn't be saying that because people are going to watch it on Sunday, and everybody's going to do it during the week.
He was always against that. He'd rather race somebody, and that's fun.
When somebody dumped Mike and it was a deliberate, it would twist him terrible.
Szegedy hits the throttle, and he's going to be half a car length on Goodale as they get to turn number 1. Turns 45, 44 to go now. And a familiar pattern. Todd Szegedy signals for the left turn, makes it, pops out at 2 with the lead.
Not one point during that time I ever was pushing the car or going beyond my limits, so I knew I had a car that we had a really good shot at winning that race.
Now he's worked his way into the top 10.
Steve Park in the middle of that mix as well in the number 20.
I knew the only way that I could win the race was by trying to save my tires. So I really didn't try to pass anybody. There was spins, there was crashes.
Hop and over! Danny Bone! Oh my goodness!
We had multiple, yellows and green flag laps, but I led 120 plus laps. Next thing you know, my spotters, I feel like the car, something's going on with the car. My spotter's like, you got sparks flying all over the place.
Uh-oh. What's that?
Yeah,
is the right front ball joint, lower ball joint come off that car? Look at how the front wheel's wobbling back and forth.
Something not right with that right front at all.
Next thing you know, boom, I go straight, right front wheel falls off the car. You gotta be kidding me here.
Trouble with the ball joint, and they are not happy down here. Frustration for Todd Szegedy. Had led 126 laps. No one else had led a lap tonight.
He ended up dropping out, so Michael inherited the lead.
Green flag to settle this one with 19 to go. Stefanik got a great restart.
And the race is going on, and Michael's leading.
Right now, Stefanik is getting off the corner so good, and the yellow is out for the 16th time.
I just decided that if I just methodically moved my way to the front, and if I was in the top 5 in the last 10 laps, I'd have something to race with.
The car on the restarts really had a jump. It could drag race and pull away from them.
And Steffi grabs the gear and goes into turn 1. Goodale's going to have to stay with him if he's to have a chance.
When we restarted, we got through 1 and 2, trying to get up to speed. We got up to speed going down the back.
On turn 2, here comes Park on the inside. He wants that second spot away from Kuhnel, and I think he's got the position going after Stefanik.
You know, we were running 5th or 6th towards the end of that race. Everybody's out of brakes, overheating. We were really overheating at the time and just, you know, praying to make it to the checkered.
And when I lifted, Mike was leading, I was second. And when I lifted, I thought my throttle stuck.
Steve Park, almost a spin in 3. Everybody recovers, keeps going, except Pit Cat's dragging somebody. But we've taken the white flag now. The leader has the white flag. Stefanik's around. No, Steve Park and Stefanik get together.
And frame changed, and he was no longer in the lead. I go, where did he go? What happened?
Those guys all stack up in front of us, and the next thing you know, Michael goes around.
When that accident happened, of course, he was right at the end. It was right at the end of the race.
And Michael goes spinning, and Steven is able to weave his way through to take the checkered flag.
Former modified tour runner-up in the Shiba Racing Sunoco number 8, Steve Park is going to be first to the checkered flag. They're spinning in turn 3.
It's a shame it had to end that way. It's a shame they let it end that way. He drove a great race. He did nothing wrong.
Where the pits were was like 500 yards away from the racetrack, down on a parking lot. And it was dark down there.
I remember it was a long walk pulling the pit cart from where the pits were at the infield back to where the Paulas were parked.
And Mike was very upset over it.
And he was just sitting on the tailgate of a dually back there, and Ray Dunlop was there with the cameras and the microphone and everything.
Camera goes on him, and I'm looking at that face. I've seen that face, and it's like, no, 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 no. Leave him alone, leave him alone.
I could tell he was really pissed off because you could see the vein popping out of his forehead.
I mean, I could tell when I saw there was a vein here. And when that vein pops, that's not good.
No, I had seen Mike angry, but I'd never seen him lose his cool. He was always professional.
I was standing 2 feet from him going, I've never seen him that mad.
I could just tell he was not in a good mood.
That was just so different because that was a Mike Stefanik nobody had ever seen before.
When I saw Michael sitting on the back of the trailer, I'm like, I don't want to be the guy interviewing him.
And he actually did say to the interviewer, hey, give me a minute. And the guy didn't.
In NASCAR, if something happens, before you even have time to go back and look and think about it, they got a camera and a microphone in your face. And they're trying to get those emotions, you know? And Mike sure gave it to him.
I give Michael credit that he did the interview. He was so mad, he probably didn't have to say a word. But he did.
Steve Park said that he got hit from the driver behind him and pushed him into you, and he said it was just one of those racing deals.
Yeah, right.
And from there, Mike's face froze.
I could hear him telling Ray that you don't want to interview me because I'm not going to say anything good.
I'm just going to say the wrong thing here. I am that freaking pissed. It's just bullshit.
And he looked up and he said it, and I'm like, what? Where do we go from here?
The way he said it, I mean, you could tell he was mad, but he's just very literal because it was. What happened? Because the whole race was that way. It was caution riddled. You had cars upside down. You had all kinds of stuff going on that made it for good, you know, to be funny. And it was a lot of bullshit that went on in that race. So he was just being literal.
A lot of credit goes to them for what they attempted to do and the money they paid, but that was a tough race for everybody, and I think a tough look.
I couldn't see Steven purposely dumping the guy to get the win because Steven didn't race like that.
We raced against Steve for all those years. Those guys raced clean. They never touched each other. They never did anything. And Steven was not known for that his whole career.
Michael, by that time, and I were super close, or what I would consider super close, but I knew Steve too. And I never thought Steve would do something that malicious, which we later learned.
Steve Park did get in touch with me, I think the following day on Facebook, and asked if it would be okay if he called Michael. And I gave him the phone number, and I said, why don't you give him a day or two?
You know, we let a little time go by, and then I reached out to him and Julie and said, you know, we've raced our whole entire lives together in the modifieds, and we never had an instance. And I said, you know, and I wasn't going to start it there. There was somebody behind me, which was the 58 car. He just never backed off of me. He just drove me down in the corner like you wouldn't believe.
If you go back, I believe Eric Goodale was the one that hit Steve Park into Michael.
I think he was trying to knock me and Mike out of the way. And I said there was nothing I could do. And when they looked, after, like I said, letting time go by, and they were able to look at the replays and analyze that I was being pushed.
He's okay with it. I mean, it is what it is. But, Steve's like, I didn't intentionally, dump you.
Unfortunately, Mike had to be involved in it because, he was one of the guys that I looked up to for a very long time.
That whole deal was more about how racing had become than what happened that night.
He wasn't just mad at what happened. He was mad at policies before, policies after, the have-at-it attitude of NASCAR at the time. He didn't like that.
I know he would have frowned on that result even if he was at home watching that race and another guy had been knocked out of the way like that. I think he would have thought it was a bullshit way to end the race. Whether Matt Hirschman was the winner or Steve Park or Goodale or, guys who were in that race or guys who are superstars now in racing. I just think the manner of the finish bothered Mike as much as the fact that it was him involved in it.
We left the track that night and he was still in a mood, and we went to IHOP, and it was me, Dave, John Canto, the sponsor, was with us. We went to IHOP and we're in there, and there was 2 other people in there, and we're eating, we're getting done, and those 2 people went walking by, and the guy looked at him and he goes, "Hey, Mike, that was bullshit tonight, right?" And, it just kind of finally got a little bit of a chuckle out of him.
I told him he needed to thank me for getting him on Jay Leno. And
I think it was Jay Leno's show the following night. They showed the clip.
I remember laying on the couch half asleep, and when the clip came on and the whole thing, I was like, oh my God. It was like when Ronnie Bouchard won Talladega. I was like, I was jumping up and down and like, Mike Stefanik's on the Tonight Show.
I woke up and my phone was like, I'm like, what the heck? And it was like, did you see Michael was on the Jay Leno show? I'm like, no. Right. So I opened my laptop and I had to go find it. And I was like, Michael, it was like 6:00 in the morning. I go, check this out. You were on Jay Leno last night.
Now Mike Stefanik goes from being a great regional racer to knowing somebody nationwide on one of the premier late night talk shows.
I can see why Jay Leno or somebody made fun of it, on late night TV. It is a funny thing.
He says, 9 championships and my 5 minutes on Jay Leno is just what I'm going to be known for.
Sadly, that's how a lot of people know Mike Stefanik, is from what happened that day.
It always bothered me that Mike is so well remembered for that Daytona thing, because I don't think he was ever that kind of guy.
That became what the whole world outside of racing understood Mike Stefanik to be. And it was the polar opposite of who Mike Stefanik was.
It wouldn't, if you hadn't brought it up right now, it's not even on my top 200 memories of the guy, And there's a lot of people that whenever Mike's photo comes up on Facebook, inevitably somebody comments with just the words bullshit. And it angers me that people remember him just for that, because to me, that was just a little blip on an unbelievable career. Oh, that bothers me. I'm going to punch a wall.
The last time I saw Michael race in person was at Bristol.
When they first announced that Bristol was on the schedule for the modifieds, Michael was happy about it.
When they put that on the calendar, that was a place he certainly wanted to win.
He would race there once a year every August for 4 years, and I would go there and spend the whole day with him, and it was just so much fun.
Anytime the modifieds ran at Bristol, it was a highly anticipated event. And if you were anywhere near a TV and the coverage was there, you had to watch it.
It is thought they might be pulling 3 Gs plus in the corners. Wow.
Yeah, and we know that from telemetry that was put in one of these cars during a testing session earlier. 3.8 around and 3.2 Gs down.
Todd Szegedy is a former champion of the Tour.
I couldn't have been more excited. 26 degrees of banking with a modified. To me, that I knew it was going to be the best experience in the world.
That place is sketchy, man. It's tiring. You're going to grip a steering wheel about as hard as you could ever grip a steering wheel. It's different.
It's the ultimate racer's racetrack. If you want to feel the true adrenaline and what the thrill of going fast and G-forces and speed and how things happen so quick there, Bristol is it.
You hear the first modified go out on the track and they're not lifting through the corners. It's like, wow, this is where the big boys come to play.
Picture someone trying to sit on your head and pushing your head down going into the corner. Now picture this. Mike's 55 years old. I'm 36. And he passes me.
Oh, Szegedy gets loose in turn number 1. Here comes Stefanik on the bottom side. Score. Mike Stefanik is the leader of this race.
They battled back and forth, but they were very clean racing. There wasn't bumpers banging.
And Stefanik pulls the trigger. He gets a really good jump on Todd Szegedy.
And I think Todd had an opportunity to kind of get him back, but Todd, without rubbing him, he couldn't really get him.
Look at Szegedy get loose off of turn number 2 just a little bit, trying to close the gap. Just a lap and a half to see if Szegedy can get the job done.
Juhas in third. Priest goes for fourth. White flag. Next flag ends the race.
Here it is, turn number 3. This will be the setup. Here comes Szegedy. Will he look high or low coming off of 4?
I thought he'd do a bump and run, but he didn't get to the back bumper, and Mike Stefanik scores his 74th modified tour win.
I think he was in his mid-50s when he won the race at Bristol, which was probably one of the hardest tracks to drive on. So from a physical standpoint and a mental standpoint, at 55 years old, to go on and win the race like a 35-year-old. So it just shows you how impressive he was.
Here he is, your Bristol winner. How about it? Mike Stefanik, one of the all-time great modified drivers in history.
This is so awesome. I got to thank Chris Auer for giving me the opportunity. I'm not going to be in this sport very much longer, trust me.
And what does he do? He gets out of the car, and the first thing he says is, I'm not going to be doing this much longer. I'm like, hey, you said not to say anything, and you're just telling the whole world.
It was really special because you could see the joy in his face, much like a few months earlier, the pain he had at Daytona.
We've had an up and down season. We had a tough day at Daytona, as everybody saw, and we bounced back with a win, but we've been struggling. Todd Szegedy ran me really clean and hard. Thanks to everybody. I got to say hello to my wife, Julie, at home. I know she would love to be here for this.
Well, I think Bristol was a huge win for him. He was very excited.
Even the next day at the airport in the morning, he was just, I hadn't seen him that happy in a long time, that race was probably the pinnacle of his career.
It meant, I think, the world to him. In fact, he used the word elated. I remember watching his interview, and he's like, I'm elated. And I'm like, where did he come up with that word?
I'm just elated, relieved and elated.
I never saw him really so happy.
And I had never seen him that happy.
Awesome, man, awesome. Winning never gets boring. I'm 55 years old. It never gets boring. I can't wait for my team to get here. Where are they?
Mike, it's rare that you see Mike Stefanik do something new for a change, right?
The elation he had. And to see Christine, his youngest daughter, come running and jumping into his arms and everything, we knew how special that was.
Well, Mike Stefanik was so PO'd at Daytona after getting knocked out of the lead with the checkered flag in sight that he became a meme on Jay Leno's Tonight Show. I hope that Jay has a chance to look at this and gets to see the Mike Stefanik we know.
And if it was his last race, what a better place to win at.
Such a big win late in his career. I think that's a pretty much, aside from Loudon, that's probably the best way he could have got his last win in our series.
I'm sure any win at that point in your career is good, but if it was one more win at Thompson or one more win at Stafford, while it would have been something to be proud of, I'm sure it meant more to Mike, to look back later and say that he had won at Bristol.
To this day, I wish that it was the last race of the year and he could have won that race and just got out and retired.
He was happy he won Bristol, but it's still, he let it be known that at the time, he was getting older.
Michael got up there and I think he said he wouldn't be doing it much longer. And I think that kind of shocked a lot of people. Probably Chris was shocked to hear it as well because he was investing a lot in the team. But did Michael want to say it that way? Probably not. But I think that got Chris's phone ringing a lot.
People were calling and it was a little crazy at that time. As the year went on, Mike, the traveling, he wasn't as thrilled with anymore. He liked being home. He liked being on the lake. He liked being with his wife. He's done it so many years, you could tell, and he talked about it. Not that he wanted to throw in the towel, but he wasn't really in love with the schedule and traveling all the time anymore.
I remember the last race at the World Series at Thompson, and everybody there thinking this was going to be Mike Stefanik's last race, and he was going to ride off into the sunset. And no announcement was made afterwards.
The end of the year came, and we were done. And then, I did have a lot of people at me about different drivers. I kind of made up my mind. I think it was time that we wanted to try to excel a little bit more as far as for a longer term. So I called up Mike and I asked him if I could come see him, and I drove over to his father-in-law's wood place, and I remember it well. It's just him and I, and we sat out front there. There's a picnic table on the lawn, and we sat there and we talked, and he understood, and there was no animosity in any way. And I think in a way it might have been a little relief for him.
He and Chris Auer, they dissolved.
2014, when Mike lost the job with Chris, they hired a younger driver, and my cars were parked all of 2013. I never run them once. We just left them in the garage here. Me and Mike ended up talking a little, and I asked him if he wanted to run a few races.
Eddie wants to run some races next year, 4 or 5 races. No, we're not. I'm done. He's, I don't want Eddie spending that kind of money to go run some tour races for me. I don't, I'm not going to say I'm retired, but I'm done. He just had it. He didn't think he needed to do it. He was getting old, heard the rumors, and I go, look, I said, it ain't about you anymore. It's about us. We just want to go have some fun. And he just started laughing so hard on the phone, and he goes, you know what? All right, let's do it.
He felt that he owed Eddie some time, and there was a good bunch of guys, and they had a great time racing. There was no pressure.
He went to that last race at Loudon, and a couple of us knew that this was it. That was going to be his last race, and I think he was running, at the beginning of the race, he was running second or third, and then after the pit stop, something happened, but I think he ended up 10th in his last race, I think. But I just remember kind of standing back at the end of that race and just watching everything that was going on that he was doing, and I just kept thinking to myself, this is the end.
A lot of times when you talk to retired racers, either there's an element of bragging about what they did or an element of bitterness about what they weren't able to do. I think Mike saw himself just at the end of an incredible journey.
He was thinking of retiring, and he called me and he said, "What's it like?" And I said, "Well, it's not easy."
And he'd say to Mike McLaughlin, "So do you miss it?" And Mike McLaughlin would say, "Miss what?"
He asked Mike McLaughlin, "How do you know when you've had enough?" He goes, "You'll know. It's like when you don't want to do it anymore. You'll know."
Michael also knew that there weren't a whole lot of car owners where, hey, I can just go hop in Art's car again, or, we're going to roll a wood chopper out of the shop and go race. That wasn't going to happen, and the opportunities to continue were limited.
But I think you really have to look at, the big picture. You have to look at the era. You have to look at the fact that for car owners, it was getting tougher and tougher to finance these things.
Unfortunately, it made it attractive and more profitable for the car owners to not only get the product sponsors and the tire deals and the whole bit. They also were able to say to a driver, "You want the ride, you got to either drive for nothing or you got to write a check."
I mean, he used to get paid to race, and then now you have the young kids come in, they pay to race.
And being able to outspend to get a seat. And progressively things changed to that's the way it is, or that's the way it's become.
So I think the sport, yes, it did change.
It affected Mike. Mike knew, the end was coming. It just changed the sport to a point where that's how the sport's become.
So if you're a car owner and you're looking at it all, honestly, you got to be thinking 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road. If this kid turns out to be good and he's bringing money, we're not paying a driver. And of course, Mike was a professional race driver, got paid for what he did. You're talking about a substantial savings for an owner over the course of a year.
So when my dad was started thinking about retiring, I remember one conversation we had when I came home from college, to visit my parents. Him and I, we sat down, we just started talking about life. And he goes, yeah, racing is really not there for me anymore. I don't enjoy it as much. And I think I'm just going to not do it anymore. So I could tell he was definitely on his way out.
He never really talked to me about it. I never said, no, don't. That was his decision. And he had had enough.
Nobody in any sport is happy about retiring if you're an athlete. But there are guys who accept it and guys who don't accept it. And I think Mike eased into retirement better, just from a pure mindset point of view, than almost anybody I'd ever seen.
I respected the way that Mike went out quietly.
He didn't want to announce that he was going to retire. He's like, yeah, I'm not going to say it. I don't want any hoopla about it.
I asked him, why wasn't there more to it? And he said, I didn't need a pat on the back. Do you ever regret not having more of like an announced retirement per se, where you kind of made it known it was your last season and fans could kind of have their goodbyes and celebrate it?
Well, I'm not that guy. I'm not looking for a pat on the back.
I talked to him several times after he did it, and maybe only in the first couple of phone conversations would I ever say, do you miss it? Because there was a time after the first couple of times, it was clear that he didn't.
Do you ever get the itch? Are there ever days where you say, God, I want to get back in a race car?
God, no, not at all. Yeah. Not at all.
He told me at a race at Thompson after he had retired, he said, you won't see me at a racetrack anymore. And I was dumbfounded. I was like, why? He goes, I don't like racing. And I'm thinking, how can a 9-time champion not like racing?
I'm not really a fan of racing per se, although I do watch racing on television, But being a competitor, it's just, you have a reason to be there, you have a home base, you have a purpose. And when I go to the racetrack, and I've been to a couple races since I've, stepped out of it, I just feel like a fish out of water, so it's really not for me.
He was really good at just shutting out racing, and I feel like that might be the way I want to do it one day. Like, you can't go to the racetrack and watch other people win races. It's really tough.
I always said that when I stepped away or retired, I wasn't going to be the type that would come back. I think people knew that I was my seasons were winding down, and I kind of let it be known that I wasn't going to be doing this, for too much longer. So, I didn't know exactly when it was going to happen, but I knew it was going to be, it was getting close, it was getting to be time, and I didn't want to be that guy riding around, just taking up space, and people saying, well, geez, Stefanik, you should have gave it up a couple years ago, look at him now. Yeah. I didn't want that. I didn't want to be that guy, so I made sure I bailed out while we were still competitive and, getting poles and winning some races and running up front and being a contender. So kind of went out on my terms.
After a Saturday night race at Riverside Park, we were all going to Jennerstown the following morning, and Clyde McLeod, who was crew chief for Mike McLaughlin, had got about a 12 or 14 seat plane. And I remember Mike Stefanik and Mike McLaughlin jokingly talking about who's going to sit in the co-pilot seat. Well, Mike Stefanik says, well, I'll take it then. And Mike sat up there and just seemed in awe of it. So on the way back from the flight, Michael gets in the passenger or in the co-pilot seat again. And I said, so is this something you'd like to do down the road? He goes, who knows, maybe.
He could never kick that adrenaline rush. He needed it.
And he was an adrenaline junkie. That's what I used to tell him.
After racing, he started this idea about building a plane.
Then he called me one day and he said, I just bought an ultralight kit. I go, what? He said, it's an ultralight kit. It's an airplane.
pretty impressive, especially in your retirement. Mike wasn't that type of guy that was going to sit still.
You really got to know what you're doing to fly a plane. Now, let alone build one.
He bought an ultralight kit. It got delivered to the lumberyard. He brought it here, 1,000,000 pieces.
I was there when he was showing me some of the pieces that I like, get everything powder coated and every part and piece like separated.
When he built that thing, he was as meticulous about that as, he just loved the whole process of putting that thing together. That was his, like building a race car.
He said he enjoyed the ultralights because it was something he could do with his hands himself, put it together and build what he wanted to build.
And he was like a kid in a candy store.
He was so excited. I mean, he was like a kid, got every toy he wanted for Christmas.
He really enjoyed building the plane, and he always talked about it, and he always sent us pictures.
To have a kit plane type of a deal where it's mechanical, where you're involved in it, it's not like going to your local airport and getting in somebody's Cessna. This is something that you had a direct hand in.
He put it all together, and then he had to get his pilot's license.
He went to pilot school. He couldn't have cared less about school when he was in grade school or high school. He got C's just to keep my mother off his back.
I just basically wanted a plane that I could take off, out of a field in our backyard. It was challenging to get my license, and I'm not one to sit on the porch, and I do like a little bit of thrill. I'm a little thrill seeker.
I remember flying with him and how peaceful he was when he was flying. He was just so happy.
It was relaxing for him. It was peaceful. He could just go up by himself. He called it his flying lawn chair.
Here we go. This was a river run I made today. Saw this river and just had to go down and explore it. I did a run down to make sure there's no wires, people, buildings, obstructions. Dropped down, and what a thrill.
He might have loved that more than racing, honestly. It was like talking about his kids.
This is the closest I can get to being in a race car. He said, it's awesome. He said, you got to try it.
What I miss most about the racing, is the excitement that it puts in your life. I mean, whether it's excitement or chaos or whatever you want to call it, I needed something that was exciting, and I wanted a challenge.
So Mike sends me this ultralight video of him flying with a GoPro on his ultralight. And it was pretty awesome to watch. But I'm like, dude, there's no way I'm going up in that thing. No way. I said, you're crazy,
Anytime I saw him, you gotta come and visit one day, we'll take you up for a ride. And I was like scared to death of it. I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. And
I am not going in it. So you can do whatever you want. I said, I am not going in it.
I says, Michael, them things are in the air, not on the ground. He says, yeah, but he says, I love it. He says, it's amazing. So I said, well, just be careful with it.
I would have loved to probably, in hindsight, got a ride, but I would have been scared the entire time, I think.
If I ever go flying with him, he's gonna scare the living crap out of me. That would be his sole mission.
I went up with him several times. My daughter, Nicole, Christine, would never go up with him. I was a nervous wreck. He just, it's not like flying in a big airplane.
I got a call one morning from Mike. I said, what's going on? And he said, you're never going to believe where I'm going. He said, I'm on my way to Bugsy's house. I'm going to take him up today in the plane. And I thought, man, that's the coolest thing ever, because as a young guy, Mike had been a card-carrying member of the Bugsy Stevens fan club, literally, had the card. Bugsy would often talk about how he became a Mike Stefanik fan.
He went and picked Bugsy up in Rehoboth, brought him over to the airport, took him flying, and I believe both of them had called Bones and said what an awesome time they had.
So I get a call later that afternoon, and I look, it's from Mike Stefanik. And naturally I pick it up, and I said, well, how did it go? What did Bugsy think? And Bugsy talked about, man, that was a lot of fun. You get up there, and he's trying to scare me, but he didn't scare me, and I thought it was cool. And then I talked to Mike later on. He called me after he dropped Bugsy off, saying that for Mike, it was a very fulfilling thing to give this hero, a pretty exciting afternoon. Well, then later that day, Bugsy called, and I talked to Bugsy, and he said, that's the coolest thing I did since I got out of a race car. The most adrenaline-producing thing, the raise your heartbeat type of thing. I mean, he loved it.
I'll tell you, I can't wipe the smile off my face every time I go fly the thing. I call it a flying lawn chair, but it's actually a pretty cool little airplane.
The scenery's incredible. There is an element of risk in the fact that you're hundreds of feet off the ground.
We're up there flying around, and You know, in those things, there's no floor, so you're looking between your feet and you're looking right down at the ground.
All I see is feet sticking out the front. What the heck is that? And so he said, when am I going to get you on that thing? I said, Mike, ain't going to ever happen.
The aviation stuff, I think, fulfilled something in him.
He loved that.
How could you not feel good about the way he lived his life? Because he did everything he wanted to do.
It'll thrill you just watching him.
He was having a thrill, and he's like, Theresa, if anything happens to me up here, don't you ever worry about me. I'm having the time of my life up here. This is heaven. And he meant it.
Pulling out, clearing the trees, still followed the river. Not too many options if the engine shut off, as you could tell. But we don't worry about that. If you worry about that, you may as well sit on the porch.
So it was a Friday night, and Michael called me. He's like, what are you doing Sunday? I'm going up flying. Come on up. We'll go for a ride up the coast. You know, he's like, you can't work so much all the time. You got to enjoy life. And I got off the phone, and I'm looking at the phone, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going up Sunday, you know?
That Sunday morning, it was a normal Sunday for us. We went to a local restaurant, and he had his French toast, bacon, coffee, brought me home, and he said he was going to go fly his plane.
It was a Sunday morning. I got a phone call from Mike. I was out here working, and he asked if me and my wife, Karen, wanted to come down and go up in his plane. So I didn't say nothing for a little while, but when I come up for a break, I said to my wife that Mike had called and asked if we wanted to go down. So she said yes, and we got cleaned up and stuff, and we drove down. And when we got to the airport, the Connecticut State Police were at the airport, and I told them why we were there, and they said, well, your friend just he got in an accident, and they wouldn't give us any details.
I got a phone call that there'd been an accident, and it didn't sound like it was bad. And this gentleman sent his wife to pick me up. She brought me to the hospital.
I went to Skippy's house directly from the airport, but on my way to Skippy's, I called a friend of mine that lives right near the airport, and he had told me that Mike got in a plane crash and he got burned really bad.
Somebody's knocking at the door, and it was actually Eddie Marceau. And he said to me, he says, how's Mike? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? I don't know. And he's like, well, he crashed his plane. And I'm like, what?
He called Nicole, and he said to Nicole, like, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, I'm watching the Patriots game. And then when he hung up, I said to Skip, I go, you got to go get her and like get to the hospital.
Skippy and Cheryl came pick me up, and we went to the hospital.
So we get to the hospital, Rhode Island Hospital, and I drove up to the front door, and Cheryl and Nicole got out. There was a lady standing with Cheryl and Nicole, and she said, I'll bring you up, up this elevator over here. It's kind of a private elevator. So I'm going over there, and I'm thinking to myself, well, this lady must be a race fan, must know who Mike Stefanik is, because they're just, that's how it was. You went with Michael somewhere. Somebody seemed to always know him, and, we get to the fourth floor, and, as soon as those elevator doors open up, I just realized that it wasn't your normal hospital floor, and I just instantly knew that, it was bad.
So I guess I didn't realize how severe it was till I got there. But I was still thinking, he's my superhero. He could pull through. But I guess his injury was just too severe for him to overcome.
I was sitting in a room, and the doctor came in, and he said he was like burnt. He had burns over like 90% of his body.
And Julie said to us, she says, you want to go in and see him? And I'm like, yeah, of course, and we went into the room, and I just walked up to the bed, and it was just, it was just bad. When he hit nose first, the plane flipped over.
The gas tank was underneath the seat, so when he flipped, all the gas poured all over him.
The ironic thing about that whole thing is Mike walked away from the wreck. So I'm like, what in heck killed them.
The NASCAR racing world is mourning the loss of a beloved champion from Western Massachusetts, Wilbraham native Mike Stefanik. The 61-year-old Stefanik was killed when his single-engine airplane crashed Sunday near the Connecticut-Rhode Island state line.
Ultimately, his death was from the burns, and his blood pressure just dropping.
And I guess being older, your organs don't do well.
Then Nicole called me and said it didn't look good, and they wanted to keep him alive until Christine got there, but it was getting too hard on his body to do that.
If he makes it through the night, he's going to have all these surgeries and stuff. And I'm like, that's not Michael. We had living wills, and like he said, I'm not going to sit on the porch. Don't ever put the Velcros on me. And he would have been so mad if I put him on life support.
I think Julie just looked at me and just said, shook her head or nodded her head, and I just shook my head. He wouldn't have wanted to suffer. I just remember the doctor coming in and saying he was sorry, and I just remember him saying time of death's 6:41.
Nicole was able to be with us at the end. Christine was living in Michigan, and her mother-in-law flew in. I think they got in like 1 o'clock in the morning the day after. And I asked her if she wanted to see her dad and say goodbye to him, and she did.
Fortunately, she was able to be with Michael and get to spend a few minutes with him anyway, so. It was his buddy's plane. He took his buddy's plane out because I think he didn't have enough hours to have his license, and the guy had been building this plane. And you always used to say, driving race cars, you never take out somebody's race car that you haven't worked on. You don't know what's involved with it, and because you'll end up getting hurt. And you think you go back to that and you think about it, and it's like, why was he up in this plane?
My son called. My wife said, Eric's on the phone. She goes, something happened to Mike. So I called, spoke to Eric, and he says, I just got a phone call that said that Mike went down in his plane. I said, that sucks, man. Did he get hurt? So I don't think he made it. I said, damn it, Michael, what the hell did you do?
I was probably in shock more than anything that whole night, but I remember kneeling and crouching on the side of the tire trailer and kind of losing it. There wasn't going to be any more weather calls. Hey, Skotnick, how many feet of snow you got? What's going on? And I realized that pretty quickly, and that was a hard pill to swallow.
I was just driving to Pomfret on a Sunday morning, and I'm thinking to myself, man, we're just having this problem. I said, maybe I'll just give Michael a call. And that was a Sunday morning. It was probably 6:37 in the morning. So I said, I'll give him a call later today. And I remember the exact place I was. I received a phone call that said he was killed.
I got a text that said Mike Stefanik was in a plane crash. I just remember this feeling of like, no, because it was like this, all of a sudden I thought about Teddy again.
The thing that blew me away, it was 2 years minus 1 day that Teddy got killed in a plane crash. And I mean, I had seen these guys strap into a modified or all sorts of cars, be in crashes, and walk away. And I'm like, how is it possible that two champions die in a plane crash?
My fiance at the time said it was actually in a news feed that she had. And she said, did you hear that Mike was in a plane crash? I'm like, what? I mean, I couldn't believe it.
I got a phone call about what happened to Mike. And of course it was devastating to hear that of any friend you have.
I remember specifically sitting there for the next 2 hours by myself with the TV not even on and trying to comprehend it.
I didn't even know how to handle it. I was devastated.
Yeah, beyond shocking. It just didn't make sense to me.
Honestly, it was like hearing about Dale Earnhardt. No different. These guys are heroes, and we all think we're invincible, I guess. It just goes to show you that life's short, and it doesn't matter who we are. Tragic things can happen to all of us.
I remember walking downstairs and sitting on the couch. TV wasn't on, I was looking in the direction of the TV, and I remember just sitting there all afternoon. Like, it was just one of those unbelievable things. And what made it weirder was that you knew Mike loved it so much. It was weird to get taken out by something that gave him so much joy.
He was doing what he loved. And it was tough. It was really tough.
The funeral was very difficult. There was so many people, maybe over 1,000. I'm not even exaggerating.
At least 1,000 people show up to the service. It was a very long day, but I'm very grateful to have that experience and the love and support from people.
I remember being in the lobby before, the doors were unlocked, and just looking out and the amount of people that were driving in there then. And I remember one of the first people that were there were the Hirschmans, Tony and Brenda and Matt, and they're from Pennsylvania.
People came from Maine. Kelly Moore was there. Dave Dion, I think, came from Florida. It was overwhelming.
And the people just kept coming and coming and coming. It was really extraordinary.
The outpouring of people was incredible.
I ended up standing for 6 hours straight, receiving people. It was such an outpouring of support.
Everybody that you would expect to see, you did, but it was orderly, calm, but also a celebration, but it wasn't heavy.
It wasn't a funeral where everybody was crying. It was a story about someone who had done everything they wanted to do and succeeded in everything they had done in life.
I still remember his just smiling face for me dealing with him. It's the only thing, that's what I remember about him, so I'm good with that.
I don't let people die. He's alive in my mind and in my heart, and that's the way I deal with it.
I think it was after the wake, I went to the bathroom. I didn't know you could take a bathroom break, so I stood there for 6 hours. And I came out, and I was expecting Michael to have gotten the car. And I think that's when it hit me. Oh, he's gone. Because he would have gone and got the car, and it would have been outside the door. And that's when it hit me that he was gone.
I drove over by the house before I left, and Julie and the family went back, and I didn't want to bother them, but I just wanted to go over by the lumberyard. And there's so many memories of staying there and doing things around there, and the little back roads that he knew to get back over to 395 to get over to Thompson. And I just wanted to do that one more time.
After Michael's death, New Hampshire Motor Speedway did a nice tribute.
We did a tribute car. Max McLaughlin drove it at New Hampshire. That car was done up like the Burnham boiler car. Got the okay from NASCAR to change the number, to do all the things, and they said absolutely. And we did some special stuff for that, which was really important for me. And I don't know if that's being selfish or whatever, but just paying tribute to him meant a lot to me.
I guess it was Dave Young kept telling me, you need to get the old X6 together. We need to do something. I'm like, nah, I'm not going to do anything. And then Robbie Summers called and he says, dude, you got to do something. It was at the KOSZELA garage, and we took it to my friend Brian's barn. That's where we worked on it.
I know Skippy and a bunch of guys, they worked so many hours to get that car up and running. It was beautiful with the paint job, new tires, new engine.
Saturday afternoon, the thing was done and running, and I'm like, I'm going to call Nicole. I just wanted Nicole to drive the thing, and I didn't know how she was going to react, and I sent her a text, and I'm like, hey.
I think you'd be perfect to drive the car. I go, no, I'm all set with that. And then he goes, well, you kind of have to because the seat is so narrow, nobody can fit in the seat.
I said, you need to come up here and, make sure you fit in the seat and can touch the pedals and all that stuff.
And I sat in the seat. It was very narrow. But I also had to put 2 pillows behind my back because my feet couldn't touch the pedals.
The Modified has a 3-disc clutch, which is pretty difficult. I mean, you got to figure that out. And she's never driven standard.
And this car is so tricky with the transmission. There's no first and second gear.
She jumped in at once and stalled it the first time. And, I just kind of explained to her what you got to do and feel. And just like that, the second time, she took right off. We did it 3 or 4 times up and down the driveway.
They would push me back, and I would start it up again. So I repeated that about maybe 10 times, just so I could get comfortable putting the car in gear.
She was good with it. And I'm like, all right, see you at Thompson tomorrow.
Race fans, at this time, we invite you to please rise.
She's sitting there lined up, ready to go out. I'm a nervous wreck.
I was so nervous. As soon as I woke up that morning, I'm like, I have to do this. Like, I cannot mess this up. I have to do it again, and for my family, and as well for Skippy, because I know he put his heart and soul into that car.
And I kept saying, Nicole, you're going to be fine. Once you get it rolling, then you're good. You don't have to worry about anything. But I remember how nervous she was, and she says, I got to do it right for my dad.
So they sing the national anthem. The command, driver start the engine, would say, I turned the car on, I put it in gear, and I had 2 officials help push the car going. I'm like, please, Dad, just get this going for me.
But leading us off of pit lane today is the red X6 we noted earlier. Mike Stefanik, the last car that he built, driven today by his daughter, Nicole Coleman. Stefanik, a 7-time Wheel and Modified Tour champion, a 2-time champion of the Busch North Series, and a Hall of Fame nominee.
I said, whatever you do, I said, you got to be in the middle of the track or up by the wall. I said, because Dad will be so mad if you're out there riding around the bottom of the track in the corners around the grass. I said, just make sure you're in the middle of the track. She goes, yep, I got it.
Stefanik was a fierce competitor, a father, and a husband. Mike Stefanik, one of the greats of all time.
Now going around turn 3 and 4 on the first lap, I almost had to swerve out of the way because there was a car or a truck just on turn 4 that I wasn't expecting.
The neat thing about that day, it was so quiet.
I can still to this day remember how silent the crowd was. The place was packed.
It'll choke you up a little bit when things like that happen, and just an amazing way to honor him at a track that he has the most tour wins at.
The field before you sits silent.
I just had goosebumps all over me. It was just so quiet. The second lap, you could hear her get on the throttle going on the backstretch. And I'm like, all right, Nicole, calm down a little bit.
I gave her a little bit more gas. I'm like, come on, I'm in a race car, so I might as well. And then coming down pit road, and my mom's behind me in the pace car.
It wasn't choreographed or anything, but she came down pit road, and all the crew members came out on pit road and were clapping.
It was heartfelt. She drove her right into the pits and right over to the trailer, and she did an awesome job. Michael would have been proud.
That was the coolest moment, one of my top 5 moments in my life.
I think in terms of pure credentials, Mike absolutely belonged in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. It worried me a lot that the induction class size had gone down from 5 every year to 3 every year. And obviously that was going to narrow it down for short track racers no matter what they drove.
He wanted it that first time because I think it would have meant a great deal to him.
It took a couple of years. He was eligible to get nominated for a couple of years there. And he's like, yeah, well, pretty soon they'll be sick of kicking my name around. They'll vote me in here pretty soon. But I think it was that same night. He was like, if I ever do get in, I want the X6 in there. I'm looking forward to putting that thing together. And
once Richie Evans got in the NASCAR Hall of Fame,
we knew that that path was open for people in late model sportsman, Busch Grand National, the Truck Series, the Modifieds.
So when my dad got nominated into the Hall of Fame, I remember being at my mom's house. It was me and her, and we were just watching TV.
I was sitting here on the couch, and all of a sudden I got up to get a glass of water or something. I look, and his face is on the screen, and I'm like, oh, what's that? And he was the first one. That was exciting.
I remember sitting at home when they were making the announcement of who was going to get in. His face came up on screen that they announced him in. I just lost it. He'd wanted that for so long, and now he's going in with the best of the best.
This is the greatest honor there can bestow on your 37 years of racing. I mean, this is going to Cooperstown. I mean, only the best of the best go there, and certainly as a modified guys.
Having him, being inducted into the Hall of Fame is something that, I'm proud of, being a modified guy.
Michael deserved it because he won a lot of the big races. And like I said, 9 championships.
9 championships. I mean, he should be there.
Winning 2 touring championships in one season where the 2 divisions rarely raced together in the same place on the same day. Everybody took note of that and went, wow.
I think somebody in that selection committee meeting was really doing their homework, because Mike's career wouldn't easily be explained to a voter from Nevada or Oregon or Minnesota. And the various places where the committee members come from. I think once you sat down and really looked at what he did in the course of that career, it was definitely Hall of Fame worthy.
People are very proud. I mean, a lot of New England people don't get into the Hall of Fame, and that was very exciting. And I think he would have been very proud.
I don't know how to say this, but I knew as soon as he was gone, he was getting in.
The only thing that was bad is I wish he was still here when that happened.
I just wish he could have been alive to get it himself.
There should be a lesson to the voters on that. When you have the opportunity to do the right thing, it's never the wrong time. And because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring.
It was just that same night, I'm like, he wants the X6 in there, can I do that? Restoring that car just meant everything to me personally. We'd work on it in Eddie Marceau's garage.
We restored the car here in this shop. It was a group effort, but it came out so perfect.
The NASCAR Hall of Fame banquet would have been a whole lot different if Michael were there. I couldn't help but think that as I went there. Although I will say NASCAR did an amazing job at including his memory into the ceremony, and made just driving into Charlotte and seeing the billboard with his face on it. It was like, oh, I don't know if I can get through it. And then there was the Walk of Fame where they had this sidewalk with his face on it.
It was a pleasure to restore the car that we did. And it was beautiful, like such a beautiful piece. It was just the wow factor when you walked into the room upstairs in the Hall of Fame, the car jumped out at you.
What an honor to have the X6 sitting there next to Dale Jr., Red Farmer. It just was the frosting on the cake.
It just meant everything to me to do it. So many nights in the garage, I'd be looking over my shoulder going, is he watching me? Is this coming out how he'd want it done? It just meant personally so much for me to be able to do that.
Skippy did such a wonderful job with that car, putting it together and making it look really good. I was very proud of the trophies that they had put into the case.
And then there was the trophy from the Bristol, the fire suit from Mike that had our Robert Hour logo on it. And I will say it was emotional. The tears were running down my cheeks for him.
And then I was called, being fortunate enough ones to be able to a little gathering there with me and Mike and Kyle Petty and Ray Everham, those 4 of us that actually knew him pretty well. I was pretty honored that they picked me to come do that thing.
I was very proud of him, and I was very grateful that all the people that remembered him and everybody got to see the remarkable racer and the person that he was.
I was lucky enough to be invited to go and sat with my good friend Robbie Summers. We may have had a laugh or two, but it was so cool to see all that and kind of be able to feel a part of it and know that some part of you is in there.
Of course, the first night we had almost like an opening ceremony where all the past Hall of Fame inductees got to show up, and my mom went up there in my dad's place to get the blue jacket. And that was really cool because I got to take pictures with Jeff Gordon and Dale Jr. and I got to see Mark Martin, so it was very cool to see all the famous drivers, even though they're really not famous to me because I grew up in racing, but it was just kind of cool to see, the big names there.
And I got all this is, all the itinerary, and I'm just like assuming, I guess you shouldn't assume, assuming that I have to make a speech. So I started working on a speech, and then someone from NASCAR, from the Hall of Fame, called, and they're like, well, you don't get to speak. So I sent someone a message, and I said, so who, if I can't speak, who is going to speak on Michael's behalf? And they said, no one. And I'm like, that's not right.
Yeah, I think she was a little upset about it, which obviously is understandable because, she was there his whole racing career.
NASCAR was not going to allow her to speak on Michael's behalf.
So actually, Randy Talsma said, well, if they're not going to let you speak, copy your speech and put it out on social media. And I did that. And it went crazy. I felt like I went viral. And it was really cool just to see how many people were behind me.
I think it went through all of us, and Dale Jr. was the guy that stepped up, that had enough clout to say, with Mike going in, Julie, who's been his right-hand woman for his whole entire career, should have the opportunity to speak.
Fortunately, Little E stepped up and I'm sure put some pressure on some people and made it known that it was the right thing to do.
And on Monday, I got a phone call, and they're like, well, so you have 7 minutes and 800 words or vice versa. You need to send your speech in, and we'll put it on a teleprompter. Then I got real nervous. And now I got to speak.
It was actually a little bit embarrassing that we had to go through that to get her to be able to do that. But,
She did a great job, and especially a toast at the end. It was pretty touching.
I just wasn't Michael's wife. We were a team. I spotted for him for many years. And to quote a friend, Michael was an ordinary guy doing something extraordinary. And with that, in his honor, we have a Jack and Diet. Thank you.
I got a standing ovation. I looked out, there's Richard Petty standing, Dale Jr. It was an unbelievable experience.
Michael would have been so proud of Julie with the speech she gave.
Thought she absolutely crushed it.
God bless Julie for being strong enough to get up there and speak.
When I came off stage, Tony Stewart was standing there, and he gave me a hug, and he said, you knocked it out of the park. And then my legs just I had to go sit down.
After that, a month or two later, he was nominated to NASCAR's top 75 drivers list, and you see him on TV, and you think to yourself, man, that is so cool that he's in with all these greats in NASCAR.
Mike Stefanik is one of the greatest drivers in NASCAR history.
The success he was able to sustain over such a long period of time, and records that, we're going to try our hardest to get to, but I don't know if anybody will ever get to those records.
Michael had credentials that he didn't want to talk about, but they were there. And he wanted you to respect that.
I think that most people, when they think about Michael's life, they would think about him as the race car driver. Tenacious, prepared, exacting, pragmatic, a lot of integrity.
I try to use my head a lot, and you can get out of a lot of situations just by thinking ahead and setting the car up for the long race.
It was calculating and surgeon-like. So it wasn't these big diving moves to get under three cars and take one guy out. It was just this surgical precision to get to the front of the racetrack that was his calling card.
Like, everything was perfect. He didn't make mistakes. He's about as perfect as it gets for a driver.
Anytime you showed up, he was going to be the guy to beat.
He was just so good at managing races and beating the competition on the racetrack with strategy and the way he knew how to manage a race.
He could design his own car, he could build his own car, he could race his own car, he could come in and tell you what it needed. There's a lot of great drivers out there, but I'd say less than 1% of them can do what he did.
Mike fits in well, when you look at all of his career, he just has so much success No, almost no matter where he is. If he's in a modified or a Busch North car, it's running at or near the front.
Michael proved that you could just be this humble guy that went to work and still be a champion. There's very few anything in sports that earn the ultimate goal 9 times.
If you look at the history book, Mike Stefanik is on top.
We knew that we were just normal guys, and that at the end of the day, we put our shoes on the same way everybody else did. We get up in the morning and went to work like everybody else. And I think that's what I like most about Mike Stefanik.
You find out at the end of your career what you accomplished really isn't that big a deal. It's more how you conducted yourself.
Yeah, he needs to be remembered for on the racetrack, but he needs to be remembered how good of a person he was. And that, to me, is probably the most important thing that I think people should remember him for.
My mom and dad had this kind of bench stone done in Michael's memory. Blue skies forever. There was, I don't know, it stuck. Blue skies forever.
He was just a great human being.
A great family man and a good friend.
He was a great father, husband, son, brother, and friend. Live your life for today, because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. And he lived a wonderful life.
Michael always gave me great feedback, and we were at Flemington and in practice, and he was running some good times, and he says, "Car is absolutely awesome." He says, "We're good." We qualified 4th or 5th. We start the race, and we get up to 3rd, and Eddie Flemke's leading, Reggie Ruggiero's 2nd, and we're 3rd. And Michael says, "This car is absolutely horrible." And I says, "Are you kidding me?" He says, "No," but he says, "You know something? These guys are slowing me down. Let me see if I can work around them." So 2 or 3 laps, he gets by Reggie. Another 2 or 3 laps, he gets by Eddie, and he starts driving away. He says, "I just wasn't driving it hard enough. We're all set." So he always had something that he could pull from, and it was uncanny the way he could do that.
I don't know how this conversation ever came up, but we were talking about, qualifying or like first laps of practice or mock runs in practice. And he goes, if your car, when you leave pit road and you're just scuffing your tires going 30 miles an hour, if it doesn't turn then, it's not going to turn at full speed. And to this day, if we go out and I go to, make a hard left, going slow under caution, warming up the tires, and it slides or doesn't grip like you think, I immediately think Michael was right. And this run right here is not going to be where we need to be on the board. Maybe we should just pull off, fix something. Just another Mike-ism, I guess.
I'm at the shop, and Mike comes in. He's like a kid in a candy store. He's got an album. It says Engine Sounds. It's like Ed Pink on the cover, Keith Black, a bunch of these guys. And so he says, "Listen, when the phone rings, I'm going to have this queued up, and you answer. And if they ask for me, say, hold on, he's in the dyno room." And he'd turn up the volume like I open the door to the dyno room, and I'd say, "Hey, Mike, it's for you." And then he'd turn it back down like I close the door, and he'd come and answer the phone. And we didn't have a dyno room there. So a couple months later, somebody would come in and say, "Hey, where's your dyno room?" And he would just laugh.
I own my own tractor-trailer rig, and I bought a brand new Peterbilt truck in, I think it was 2018, actually. And I was hauling liquid asphalt here in Maine. And I did day trips. I had a day cab. And I would call Mike early in the morning because he was hauling asphalt with a 10-wheeler dump truck or a triaxle. And that was kind of his retirement job, he called it. And we joked about it. So he said, "Yeah, how we making out? 2 big NASCAR big shots," he says, "getting up at 4 in the morning to haul asphalt." And he'd laugh. He had a funny laugh. And he'd chuckle.
He's walking by. I'm just as serious could be. Got my game face on, ready for the anthem, all set to go. Gets right in front of me, turns, just make a turn like a military guy. I said, "Why so serious, buddy?" And I went, "What?" And he said, "Geez, lighten up or something." Just so again. And he smiled and he walked away. And I went, "What a character that guy is." I just liked the guy.
There was this one man, he was a paraplegic, His name was Larry Kirk. And he was the brother of someone who owned a restaurant in town that Michael used to visit all the time. And he knew about that man. And he went to see him in the hospital. And he had to motion to someone just so that he could drink from a straw. And Michael took it upon himself to bring his welding equipment there and create a cup for this guy so that he could drink out of a straw without having to move. He didn't have to ask anybody. I mean, it changed this guy's life immeasurably. And he said to him, I'm going to come and we're going to watch the Super Bowl together and we're going to drink Jack and Coke. And he probably got the poor man drunk, but he was so thoughtful that way.